Where are you? The ceremony is about to start. I finally got through to my husband, Kendrick, and bombarded him with questions like a machine gun. Today is our daughter, Adeline's middle school entrance ceremony. But there's only 30 minutes left before the ceremony starts, and Kendrick, who was supposed to meet me at the school, still hasn't shown up. I kept calling him over and over, worried he might have had an accident. When he finally picked up, I felt relieved. Kendrick, hey, where are you now? But as soon as I heard his voice, I felt my heart begin to grow cold. I couldn't clearly hear Kendrick's voice through the phone. It was his voice, but the noise around him was much louder. I said I'm not going to the ceremony. When his voice finally came through, he sounded ridiculously cheerful. Of course, he would be. I could hear the music of a famous theme park parade in the background. Lively music and the cheers of people filled the air. Even just listening to it, I could feel the excitement and festive atmosphere. I'm here with Ellie, having fun. You don't need me at the ceremony. You'll be fine on your own, right? We're gonna enjoy ourselves, so expect some souvenirs when we get back. Then, just like that, the call ended. I was so angry I could barely contain myself. Kendrick should have taken the day off work just for Adeline's entrance ceremony. He said he would be rearranging his schedule, working overtime for days leading up to it. And this was the result. Liar. If that's how you're going to be, then fine. My name is Charity. I have a daughter who is in the 6th grade. Her name is Adeline. Until a few years ago, it was just me, Adeline, and my ex-husband Dennis, living happily together. But separation comes suddenly. Dennis passed away unexpectedly. Our peaceful life was shattered, and both Adeline and I were drowning in grief and uncertainty. One day, during that dark time, a friend who was worried about me introduced me to someone. His name was Kendrick. We hit it off right away. Soon, Kendrick, Adeline, and I began spending more and more time together. The more time we spent, the more I found myself drawn to him. I began to think maybe I could find happiness again if I married Kendrick, and perhaps it would be good for Adeline to have a father figure in her life again. Kendrick seemed to feel the same way. And when I casually brought up the idea of marriage, I'm glad to hear you say that. I've been thinking the same. I believe I can be happy with you, Charity, he said, smiling shyly. I remember how those words made me so happy, I nearly cried. However, we couldn't move forward with the marriage talks right away. The truth is, Kendrick had a daughter as well. He was a single father. His daughter's name was Ellie. She was 2 years younger than Adeline, in the 4th grade. Ellie seemed shy and had a hard time warming up to me and Adeline. Whenever we tried to talk to her, she would quickly hide behind Kendrick. Ellie, come play with me. Adeline would invite her cheerfully, but Ellie would just look down, too shy to respond. Watching this made me hesitate about rushing into marriage. Ellie's just nervous. Maybe we should wait on the marriage talks for a while. Kendrick seemed to think it over for a moment before responding. I understand, but I still think it's better for kids to grow up with both parents. Ellie's just shy now, but she's at a difficult age. I want her to start feeling a mother's love as soon as possible. His words made me think. I wanted to wait until Ellie opened up to us more, but who knew how long that might take. I also understood Kendrick's concern. It made sense. Considering a child's development, I didn't know if I could be the right mom for Ellie, but after a few days of reflection, I decided to marry Kendrick. When I told Adeline, she was thrilled. Kendrick is so kind. I want to live with him, she said with excitement. Seeing her so happy made me feel confident in my decision to move forward with the marriage. Everything went smoothly after that, and Kendrick and I got married. At first, There was still some distance between Ellie and me, but as we spent more time together, we gradually grew closer. I even noticed Ellie and Adeline chatting excitedly about school, which put my worries at ease. But about a month after our marriage, I started noticing some strange behavior from Ellie. She began ignoring me, refusing to listen when I spoke to her. I didn't expect her to blindly follow everything I said, but as a parent, I needed to correct her when she did something wrong. Still, Ellie wouldn't respond. She would just walk away in the middle of my talking. Gradually, her attitude toward Adeline also became more hostile. There were times when Ellie would make Adeline cry, despite Adeline being older. "Ellie, listen. Why are you doing this? Did something happen?" I'd ask, worried that something might be stressing her out at school or in her personal life. But she would simply snap back, "You're not my real mom, so stop telling me what to do." Ellie turned to the side and, in a cold voice, uttered those words. Her sharp remark sent a chill through my body. It was true that I wasn't her real mom, but I had been trying my best to show her love. I told her that if she had any complaints about me, she should feel free to express them. Yet, Ellie remained silent, refusing to open up. Her aggression toward Adeline also persisted. For instance, she would eat all the treats I prepared for both of them without even asking Adeline. When Adeline would confront her about it, Ellie would say things like, "I'm worth more than Adeline anyway," words that didn't seem like they could come from a fourth grader. Ellie's behavior was becoming increasingly extreme by the day. The most troubling thing was how she disrupted Adeline's studying. Adeline was preparing for her middle school entrance exams, studying diligently every day, but Ellie would intentionally interrupt her. Despite having her own room, Ellie would purposely go into Adeline's space, saying things like, "Why are you studying so hard when you're just going to fail?" She'd also walk around Adeline's desk, making remarks like, "Oh, I really want this eraser," finding any excuse to distract her. When Adeline came to me to complain, I immediately scolded Ellie, but she didn't listen. In fact, her behavior escalated. One day, Adeline finally reached her breaking point and confronted Ellie directly. "Look, I'm working really hard on my studies, so could you please stop bothering me?" But Ellie's reaction was shocking. She raised her hand against Adeline. Adeline, however, didn't retaliate. Instead, she came to me in tears, seeking help. That was the last straw. I decided it was time to talk to Kendrick. When he came home from work, I approached him and brought up the issue with Ellie. Kendrick listened to me while holding a beer in one hand. After a while, he placed the can down on the table and said, "It's just kids fighting. Don't make such a big deal out of it. And maybe Adeline did something first, right? Adeline told me she didn't do anything. Besides, Ellie doesn't listen to me or Adeline. Look, you shouldn't expect kids to listen to everything you say just because you're the adult," Kendrick said, taking another sip of his beer. He finished it off with one long gulp, exhaled, and slammed the can onto the table. "Fine, I'll talk to her," he added, yawning as he spoke, his tone completely lacking any seriousness. Seeing Kendrick's attitude, I couldn't shake off the unease that lingered. He seemed to be taking the situation far too lightly, but I also didn't want to keep pressing him and make things worse. So, despite the sinking feeling in my chest, I simply said, "All right, please take care of it." The next day, I noticed something was off with Adeline. She didn't seem as energetic as usual. Concerned, I asked her what was wrong. Adeline nervously fidgeted with her fingers, her gaze fixed on the floor, not saying a word. Did something happen? I crouched down to her level, trying to meet her eyes. After a pause, she finally spoke. "Dad scolded me. I was at a loss for words. Kendrick scolded Adeline, not Ellie. I asked her what exactly he had said, and Adeline quietly replied, "He told me I should be more patient because I'm the older one, and to be nicer to Ellie." I couldn't believe it. Kendrick had said that. When he'd said, "I'll talk to her," I had assumed he meant he'd address Ellie's behavior. Yes, I knew Kendrick had a soft spot for Ellie. As her biological father, I could understand if he was a bit more lenient with her. But in this case, Adeline wasn't in the wrong at all. There was no reason for her to be blamed. I comforted Adeline and waited for Kendrick to return home. When he arrived later than usual, I sat him down at the dining table and got straight to the point. "Did you really tell Adeline she should be more patient just because she's the older one? Adeline hasn't done anything wrong. Did you even say anything to Ellie?" There had been no change in Ellie's behavior. If anything, she seemed to be in an even better mood than usual. Kendrick, with a beer in hand again, looked up at me with an annoyed expression. He let out an exaggerated sigh and said, "Ellie's going through a tough phase, you know. It's that adolescent stuff, right? She's probably dealing with a lot. Even if that's the case, there's still a line between what's acceptable and what's not. Have you been there for her as a mom? Maybe you're not giving her enough attention just because she's not your real daughter." I hadn't expected Kendrick to say something like that, and I was left speechless. Sensing that I didn't have a quick rebuttal, Kendrick lightly shook the beer can in his hand and said, "They're both our kids. Treat them equally. That's what you should be doing. You're the one favoring Ellie." The words slipped out before I could stop them. My frustration boiling over, Kendrick's eyebrow twitched slightly in response. "Even if Ellie's adorable and it's hard for you to scold her, blaming Adeline isn't right." "I'm not blaming her." Adeline looked so hurt. I tried to reason with him, but Kendrick stared blankly at the ceiling, showing no interest in what I was saying. After a long sigh, he muttered, "She's in 6th grade, shouldn't she be tougher than this? All this fuss over a little scolding. Defer? The reason she's upset is that you said something completely unfair. That's probably why Ellie's teasing her so much." Kendrick spat out, tossing the empty beer can into the trash with clear irritation, and stormed out of the dining room. I was left dumbfounded. Kendrick had changed so much since we got married. Before, he was kind to Adeline. He never unfairly blamed her, and he would even play with her and take care of her. Thinking back, though, I realized that ever since the wedding, he had been talking to Adeline less and less. The shift in his behavior left me with a deep sense of unease. Despite the growing tension between Ellie and Adeline, Adeline pushed through and kept studying hard. In the end, she was accepted into her first-choice middle school. When the results came in, I hugged her tightly, overjoyed. I could feel Ellie's eyes on us, but when I turned to look at her, she disappeared into another room. When I told my parents about Adeline's success, they were thrilled and decided to host a celebratory dinner at a fancy restaurant. The dinner would be attended by me, Adeline, my parents, and Dennis's parents. Dennis's parents were wonderful people, and I had stayed in touch with them. They had been kept informed about Adeline's entrance exams and had supported her throughout the process. Of course, I couldn't go without telling Kendrick, so I briefly explained the dinner plan to him. His entire demeanor changed. He had been sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone, but suddenly he stood up and rushed toward me. "Ellie and I are coming too, right? You're not seriously thinking of having a dinner without us, are you?" His voice was forceful, and he almost seemed ready to grab me. Startled, I stepped back and quickly responded, "Dennis's parents will be there, and I didn't want to make you or Ellie feel uncomfortable. I thought it might be awkward for them, so I didn't invite you this time." Kendrick's face twisted into a scowl. "Well, yay, I guess that makes sense. But I've already planned a separate celebration for just the four of us. We'll have a nice dinner together, and you and Ellie can come to that one," I said, trying to keep my tone as cheerful as possible to lift his mood. Kendrick folded his arms and let out a thoughtful grunt. After a moment of contemplation, he said, "Well, that's fine, but I'm still coming to this dinner, too." It was as though he had already decided, and the firmness in his voice made it clear. I couldn't help but let out an involuntary, "What?" Kendrick raised his index finger and adopted a more explanatory tone. "Sure, it might be a bit awkward with Dennis's parents, but we're all family, right? And the more people at a celebration, the better." "Well, that might be true," I muttered, still unsure what to do. Before I could respond, Kendrick called Ellie over. "We're going to have a nice meal," he said cheerfully, ruffling her hair. It seemed that, in Kendrick's mind, their participation in the dinner was already decided. At this point, I realized it would be difficult to change his mind. Plus, with both my parents and Dennis's parents there, Kendrick would likely behave himself. So I resigned myself to informing the restaurant and our parents that Kendrick and Ellie would be joining us. The day of the dinner arrived. Adeline, dressed in a new outfit, was beaming with excitement as she admired the luxurious restaurant. Once everyone was gathered, we started the evening with a toast. Adeline smiled as she raised her glass of juice. I glanced over at Kendrick, who was talking excitedly with Ellie, completely ignoring Adeline, who was the focus of the evening. My parents and Dennis's parents exchanged puzzled glances, clearly noticing Kendrick's behavior. When the food arrived, Adeline's eyes sparkled with joy as she used her fork and knife with perfect manners. Everyone, except for Kendrick and Ellie, watched her with warm smiles, proud of how she had grown. Kendrick, on the other hand, continued chatting with Ellie about the food. Barely acknowledging Adeline, I wanted him to at least say something to Adeline, but I didn't want to ruin the cheerful mood, so I quietly ate my meal. As the dinner progressed, the conversation naturally shifted to Adeline's hard work. Dennis's parents praised her for her diligence in preparing for the entrance exam, and my parents expressed how proud they were of her kind and responsible nature. Adeline, though slightly embarrassed, seemed to gain confidence from the compliments, clearly happy about her success. I, too, felt a deep sense of pride in my daughter, and the conversation flowed effortlessly for the rest of the night. We left the restaurant early enough to get home at a reasonable time. Even after returning home, Adeline was still buzzing with excitement. She talked nonstop about how hard studying had been, but how glad she was to have pushed through, and how much she had enjoyed the dinner. "I'm going to keep studying hard in middle school too," she said with a bright smile, using big hand gestures to emphasize her enthusiasm. Then suddenly, bang, the sound of a foot stomping hard on the floor startled us. "You're not actually good at anything." Ellie's voice cut through the air, filled with rage. I looked over at Ellie in shock as she stomped again, her voice trembling as she continued. "It just went well this time, but you're really just useless," she shouted, her words drenched in frustration. I was stunned that such harsh words could come from a 10-year-old. While I knew kids these days matured quickly, hearing something like this from my own stepdaughter was still unsettling. Maybe there were other children at her school who spoke this way, but that didn't mean I wanted Ellie to follow suit. I approached Ellie, looking her in the eye. "How could you say something like that? Adeline worked hard every day. You saw her studying, didn't you?" I tried to speak gently, but Ellie only glared back at me with intense hatred. They were unlike anything I had ever seen in a child, and it scared me. "You must be tired. Why don't you take a shower and get ready for bed?" I said, realizing that reasoning with Ellie in this state would likely be futile. My priority was to defuse the situation and get her away from the scene. But before I could guide her away, Ellie clenched her fists, her whole body trembling as she bit her lip. By the time I sensed that something was wrong, it was already too late. Ellie let out a high-pitched scream, louder than anything I had heard before, and began stomping her feet wildly. She flailed her arms violently, and her fist struck my face with surprising force. "Ouch, Ellie, calm down," I cried out, but she didn't stop. In fact, she grew more frantic, grabbing a nearby TV remote and a tissue box, hurling them across the room in a blind rage. "Ellie, stop, that's dangerous," I shouted, worried that someone might get hurt. I tried to restrain her, but she slipped away from my grasp, continuing to throw anything she could get her hands on. All the while, Adeline stood nearby, watching in fear, her face pale and on the verge of tears. "Adeline, go to your room," I yelled, fearing for her safety. The last thing I wanted was for Adeline to get caught up in this chaos. Adeline, startled, turned and began to leave the room. But Ellie wasn't going to let her go so easily. In the midst of the mess, Ellie picked up a pair of scissors and hurled them at Adeline with terrifying accuracy. A scream escaped from my throat. The scissors spun through the air, aimed directly at Adeline, and there was nothing I could do to stop them. The blades were wide open as they flew in a straight line toward her, striking her arm before clattering to the floor. As the scissors hit the ground with a loud thud, Adeline stopped in her tracks, clutching her arm. "Adeline!" I rushed to her side. When I looked at where she was holding her arm, I saw a thin cut. It wasn't deep, but seeing that wound on her made me want to scream in horror. I glanced back at Ellie, who was standing still, glaring at me with defiance in her eyes. The sight of that rebellious expression ignited a fire of anger inside me. "How could you do that?" I shouted. Ellie averted her eyes, as she often did when she didn't want to face the consequences of her actions. Her indifference only fueled my rage further, and I was about to yell again when a voice interrupted us. "What's going on here?" Kendrick asked lazily as he descended the stairs. "It's late. You're going to disturb the neighbors." "This is more serious than that," I snapped back without thinking. But I couldn't stay calm any longer. Up until now, there had been many troubles with Ellie, but nothing that involved anyone getting hurt. This time was different. Ellie's clear malice had caused Adeline to get injured. When Ellie threw those scissors, she had aimed directly at Adeline, intending for them to hit her. Ellie hurt Adeline. We came back home after a nice meal, and Ellie suddenly got angry. It would have been one thing if she just threw a tantrum, but she started throwing things. She threw a pair of scissors at Adeline, and it hit her. I explained the whole situation to Kendrick. Yet, Kendrick, looking annoyed and still holding his phone, responded dismissively. "Really? Ellie would just do that out of nowhere. Maybe you or Adeline said something that set her off." He scratched his head as he yawned. Without even looking at the kids, started fiddling with his phone again. His lack of concern infuriated me even more, and I was about to argue back, when Kendrick interrupted with another half-hearted remark. "Well, maybe Ellie feels neglected because you only ever fuss over Adeline. Like today, it was all Adeline this, Adeline that. You should consider how Ellie feels." Of course we were talking about Adeline. Today was meant to celebrate her. "Yay, I get that, but still," Kendrick muttered without even glancing my way, his attention entirely fixed on his phone. He lazily scratched his stomach, adding, "Anyway, If she got hurt, just take care of it. Then calling Ellie over, Kendrick gently asked, "Are you okay?" Ellie nodded quietly, and he continued, "You must have been startled when you got yelled at. Don't worry, Dad will stay with you until you fall asleep tonight." He patted Ellie's back and led her out of the room, showing no concern for Adeline. Watching him walk away, I couldn't even find the strength to call after him. I cleaned and disinfected Adeline's wound, then covered it with a large bandage. When I apologized, Adeline, with her gentle voice, said, "It's okay, really." Her kindness only made me feel worse, bringing tears to my eyes. I felt ashamed that even my child had to be considerate of me in such a situation. Ellie didn't throw any more fits that night, but when I tried to speak to her, she just ignored me and locked herself in her room. The next morning, even as the time for school approached, Ellie didn't come downstairs. When I called out to her from the door, she swung it open angrily, scowling as she stomped down the stairs. Without speaking to anyone, she ate breakfast and left for school without even saying goodbye. That evening, when she came home, she headed straight to her room, staying there until dinner. Days like this repeated, and when I brought it up to Kendrick over breakfast, he just said, "It's because you're always so close with Adeline. Ellie feels left out. Poor thing." Kendrick gave me an exasperated look, then glanced down at Adeline, who was sitting next to him, quietly eating her toast. "Adeline, you're the older one. Stop being so stubborn and just forgive her." Caught off guard, Adeline looked surprised at first, but then her face fell into a sad expression. She gave a small nod and whispered, "Okay, hold on. Adeline hasn't done anything wrong, and even if she can't forgive her yet, that's perfectly understandable. It's okay, Mom." But Adeline, having just swallowed the last of her food, turned to me with a somewhat lonely smile and said, watching the exchange, Kendrick let out a loud sigh, making sure we could hear. "See, this is why you two gang up on Ellie and make her feel bad," he said, standing up and leaving the room without even clearing his own dishes. He clearly believed that neither he or Ellie had done anything wrong. At this point, I was beginning to feel it was pointless to even engage with Kendrick anymore. Soon after, school let out for spring break. Ellie continued to stay shut in her room, and during the entire break, we barely saw her. I made an effort to speak to her whenever she came down to the living room, trying to avoid anything that might stress her, but she never responded. Ellie was probably dealing with something, I thought. She was still young and might not know how to express it in words. I tried suggesting we have a calm conversation, but she wouldn't even look at me. I didn't know what to do. I searched online, read through magazines for advice, but nothing seemed to help. Ellie remained silent. Amid the worry over Ellie, Adeline's middle school entrance ceremony was fast approaching. Kendrick and I were supposed to attend together. I told Kendrick about the date, but he was too engrossed in his phone, barely acknowledging me with distracted nods. He seemed utterly uninterested. Did he not care about Adeline's new beginning? Watching him sprawled out on the couch, glued to his phone, I felt my feelings for him grow colder. Toward the end of spring break, Kendrick suddenly announced that he was going to visit his parents' house, and he would take Ellie with him. Surprised, I asked him why. He glanced briefly at Adeline before responding. "Ellie's been cooped up in her room lately. That's not good for her. I thought it might be nice to let her relax at my parents' place while she's still on break. But school's about to start again, and Adeline's entrance ceremony is coming up. We'll be back by Adeline's ceremony. School starts after that, so it'll be fine." It seemed he had already packed. Ellie was holding a large bag, ready to go. I had my concerns, but Ellie had been withdrawn for so long. and I knew that staying in that state wasn't good for her. So I made Kendrick promise to return in time for Adeline's entrance ceremony and sent them off. For the next few days, it was just Adeline and me at home. Adeline seemed more relaxed than usual. Perhaps because she didn't have to tiptoe around Ellie or Kendrick. I felt a pang of guilt. I was relieved to see Adeline at ease. But there was one thing that troubled me. Even the day before the entrance ceremony, I still hadn't heard from Kendrick. I sent him messages and called, but there was no response. Was he not aware? Or was he ignoring me on purpose? He had promised to attend the ceremony, but could I really trust that? Waves of anxiety started to flood over me. The next day arrived. It was the day of the entrance ceremony. Kendrick still hadn't made contact. As I got ready to head to the ceremony, I kept trying to reach him, but nothing. Is Dad not coming? Adeline asked, her brow furrowed with worry. I tried to reassure her and hurriedly made our way to the venue. Even after we arrived, I kept calling Kendrick over and over. The phone just rang and rang, no answer. I kept calling until the very last minute before the ceremony began, sending message after message in between. Then finally, after what felt like my 100th attempt, the call was answered. Hello. Kendrick's voice sounded lethargic, but I didn't have time to scold him. Kendrick, where are you? The ceremony is about to start, I asked in a rush. He didn't answer right away. A few seconds of silence passed, and I could hear faint noises in the background. Something felt off. Finally, Kendrick spoke slowly. I'm not coming back today. What? What do you mean? I'm out with Ellie. We're staying at a hotel tonight, so I won't be home. It turned out Kendrick had taken Ellie to a theme park. They planned to spend the whole day there, and then stay overnight at a hotel in the park, something Ellie had apparently been looking forward to for a while. I hadn't heard anything about this. When had he decided on this plan? He had promised to attend the entrance ceremony, and now he was breaking that promise. Today was supposed to be Adeline's spotlight moment, and Kendrick was just as much Adeline's fodder as he was Ellie's. He was the one who had pushed for Adeline to take the entrance exams in the first place, encouraging her to dream about the future, which she had worked so hard for. But now that she had succeeded, he seemed to have lost all interest. I felt the strength drain from my body. In that moment, I realized that to Kendrick, Adeline and I didn't matter. Kendrick didn't even wait for my response before cutting me off with a terse, "That's how it is," and hung up. The only thing left was the sound of the end call tone. I glanced at the clock on my phone. The ceremony was about to begin. I wasn't going to expect anything from Kendrick anymore. If he didn't care about us, then I didn't care about what happened to him or Ellie either. With that resolve, I headed into the venue. After the ceremony ended, I took Adeline and went to my parents' house. I had no idea when Kendrick would come back, and I also needed to talk things over with my parents. We decided to stay with them for a while. I showed my parents the photos and videos of the entrance ceremony I had taken on my phone, and they were as happy as I was, maybe even more. Adeline looked delighted as well, telling them how she had been nervous but also enjoyed the ceremony and was excited to start studying hard. Those were peaceful days. Then one day, I got a call from Kendrick. There were multiple missed calls and a flood of messages from him. "Hello." When I finally answered, he started shouting down the phone in a fit of rage. "Hey, the house is being torn down. What the hell is going on? Why did you do that without telling me? I didn't hear a thing. Are you listening to me?" Apparently, Kendrick had returned from his trip, and he sighed the sight of our house being demolished. I let out a deep breath and calmly explained the situation. "I'm the one who ordered the demolition. The house is being torn down, and I've decided to sell the land. If you want to live there again, you're free to buy the land and build a new house. Why the hell would you do that? Where are we supposed to live now? And where are you going to live? That's not my problem. Why don't you move back in with your parents? And by the way, I can do whatever I want with that house. The title was under my name. You knew that, didn't you? And don't worry about Adeline and me. We're staying with my parents for now, and I already have plans for where we'll live next. The truth was, Dennis had bought the house outright, and after he passed away, it had been transferred to my name. Kendrick knew that. In fact, in the beginning, he used to stand in front of Dennis's picture and express his gratitude. Shut up, that house is mine too. It's not just yours. No, it's not. It may not have been my doing that paid for it, but legally, it's mine. Shut up. Give me back the house. Give me back my life with Ellie. Even as Kendrick yelled at the top of his lungs, I didn't feel any fear. Instead, I felt a profound sense of pity for him. You should worry about Ellie yourself. She's the only one that matters to you, right? You've ignored Adeline, who is just as much your daughter, so I don't care about you anymore. Then I added, and by the way, I know you're cheating on me. Adeline told me. You're planning to start a new life with that woman, aren't you? Using the insurance money from Dennis's policy. When I finished speaking, Kendrick suddenly went silent. I could almost picture his face turning pale on the other side of the phone. He was probably scrambling to come up with an excuse, or maybe couldn't even think straight anymore. Adeline had told me everything that day. While I had been out of the house, she overheard Kendrick talking to someone on the phone when she came downstairs to the living room. His tone was sweet, the kind of baby talk used to sweet-talk someone, and it immediately made her suspicious. She hid and listened closely, soon realizing the person on the other end was a woman. Kendrick promised this woman that he would get the money for her. He said he was going to take the insurance money. He told her there was still a lot left. Adeline had told me softly, her head lowered. In that moment, I understood Kendrick's real intentions. Dennis had chosen a high-value life insurance policy so that even if something happened to him, we could live comfortably for at least 20 years. Over time, we had been using bits and pieces of it, but the amount spent was minimal compared to the total sum. Kendrick must have been planning to give the remaining money to this woman. Over the phone, I could hear Kendrick's shallow breathing. He couldn't even muster the energy to shout anymore. In that moment, I said the one thing I had been wanting to say the most. I don't have any feelings for you anymore. I want a divorce. I heard Kendrick sharply inhale, and I waited for him to respond. A few seconds of silence passed before his voice, shaky and weak, broke through. No. Then, almost immediately, his voice rose in desperation. No, I won't divorce you. What are you saying? You've treated your own children unfairly, had an affair, and now you're saying you don't want a divorce. There's no way that's going to fly. My voice rose as my emotions took over. In contrast, Kendrick's voice turned pitiful, repeatedly muttering "I'm sorry" over and over again. The affair was just a moment of weakness, and she kept coming on to me. It was almost like she forced me. But I swear, Charity, I love you. That's the truth. And as for Adeline, I just didn't know how to connect with her. But I love her too. I care about both Ellie and Adeline. Please don't talk about divorce. Please reconsider. His excuses, delivered in a pathetic tone, stirred no emotion within me. The only thing I wanted was to sever our ties as quickly as possible. I let out a long sigh, just as Kendrick always did. You expect me to believe that there's no reconsidering its divorce. If you insist, We can settle this in court. I thought that would make him back down. After all, even Kendrick should have enough sense to know that he couldn't win in court. But to my surprise, he paused for a moment and then said, in a serious tone, "Fine. If that's what you want, let's settle it in court." I was so taken aback that I almost laughed. I suppressed the urge and asked in a serious voice, "Are you serious?" "Yeah, I'm serious. I don't want to get divorced. I want us to live together again, all four of us, as a family." "Are you kidding me? You betrayed me with an affair, broke promises to Adeline, and hurt her. You think I'd want to live happily with you and that woman? What kind of delusional thinking is that?" Before I could even finish, Kendrick interrupted me, shouting, "But you don't know that unless we try." I couldn't understand how Kendrick's mind worked. He was getting worked up all on his own, so I brushed him off and hung up the phone. The new school year started, and Adeline began attending middle school. She could commute from my parents' house, so even while waiting for our new home to be ready, getting to school wasn't a problem. Initially, she was nervous, but soon enough, she started leaving the house with a smile every day, clearly enjoying school. However, Kendrick continued to be a source of frustration. I had reached out to him several times to discuss our future, but all he kept saying was, "I don't want a divorce," and nothing progressed. So I began preparing for a lawsuit, but suddenly he backed down, saying he didn't want to go to court after all. Perhaps he realized that he didn't stand a chance and got scared. His constant back and forth of no divorce and no court started to wear me out. Then one day, the intercom rang, so I checked the screen, and I was shocked to see Ellie standing there. Kendrick wasn't with her, so I let her in and decided to hear what she had to say. I prepared a warm cup of cocoa and placed it in front of her. Ellie stared at it for a while, silent. Adeline, surprised by Ellie's visit, kept her distance, quietly observing her. After a long pause, Ellie began to speak softly, explaining what had been happening around her. As I had suspected, Kendrick had become more and more obsessed with his affair partner after moving in with her. He had started treating even Ellie coldly. They were still living at Kendrick's parents' house, but on weekends, Kendrick would leave and not return until late at night. When Ellie tried to talk to him about school, he would just fiddle with his phone, showing no interest. No matter what she did, she couldn't get his attention. Ellie told me that one day, when the other woman came over, she threw a tissue box at her. She had done this before, expecting praise from Kendrick as she always had. But this time, Kendrick pushed her away. He shouted at her, calling her a horrible person. And that's when Ellie realized for the first time that what she had done was wrong. About a month after we started living together with Daddy, he told me that Mom bullied you and kicked you out so she could marry Daddy. He said Mom was a bad person who forced him and me to live with her. He also said Adeline thinks I'm stupid and in the way, and that I'm the only one who can fight Daddy's battles. Daddy told me to ignore Mom and interrupt Adeline's studying. I asked if it was really okay to do that, and he said it was fine because I was like a hero defeating the villain. He said Mom was a bad person who forced him and me to live with her. He also said Adeline thinks I'm stupid and in the way, and that I'm the only one who can fight Daddy's battles. Daddy told me to ignore Mom and interrupt Adeline's studying. I asked if it was really okay to do that, and he said it was fine because I was like a hero defeating the villain. Ellie's small hands trembled as she held the cocoa. Her eyes were brimming with tears, ready to spill at any moment. But when Kendrick got mad at me for throwing the tissues at that woman and called me horrible, I realized maybe what I did to Mom and Adeline was wrong, too. With that, Ellie broke down in tears. sobbing loudly. I sat there, frozen, pressing my hand against my forehead. The anger and disgust I felt toward Kendrick were boiling inside my head. How could he be so despicable? He had brainwashed his own child with lies, tearing apart our family while keeping his hands clean and laughing at the mess he created. He had manipulated Ellie, soothing her worries with false reasoning, just to hurt us. What was his endgame? What did he think he was achieving? I gently embraced Ellie as she cried in my arms. Between sobs, she kept repeating, "Mom, I'm sorry," her voice barely audible through her tears. After a while, Ellie quieted down, sniffling softly, and looked over at Adeline. "Adeline, I'm sorry," she whispered, bowing her head. Adeline stood in the corner of the room, her head lowered, biting her lip. I could tell her mind was racing, filled with conflicting emotions. "It's too late for apologies now," Adeline said, her voice heavy. Ellie lifted her head and stared at Adeline. "It was really hard for me. All the things you did. I worked so hard, but you kept interrupting me. I was only in 4th grade, so I couldn't fight back. I kept wondering why you were doing those things to me." Ellie looked down again. Whether she was feeling remorse or just awkward, I couldn't tell. Adeline, choosing her words carefully, continued slowly, almost as if forcing them out. "I hated it, over and over again. Even when I asked you to stop, you wouldn't. But there were times when we got along, and those moments were fun." Adeline's eyes, now misty with unshed tears, met Ellie's. She spoke in a clear, firm voice. "If you promise not to do things like that again, then I'll forgive you. You can't just do whatever someone tells you without thinking about it." At Adeline's words, Ellie lifted her head, her own eyes filled with tears, which seemed ready to spill down her cheeks. There were things I wanted to say to Ellie myself, but since Adeline had forgiven her, I decided to let it go for now. Just as I exhaled in relief, the intercom buzzed again. I went to check, but before I could, the intercom rang incessantly, as if someone was furiously pressing the button over and over. The sound was so overwhelming I wanted to cover my ears. When I checked who it was, the screen showed Kendrick, his face twisted in a demonic expression as he repeatedly slammed the intercom. "Hey, is Ellie in there? Get Ellie out here now." His voice was harsh, almost a threat. Both Adeline and Ellie shrank back in fear. I told them to stay inside and made my way to the door. I cracked it open, leaving the chain on, and was immediately confronted with Kendrick's bloodshot eyes. "Give me Ellie. I know she's there with you." "She's not here." "Go home." I lied instinctively, sensing it was too dangerous to hand Ellie over to him in this state. But Kendrick wasn't backing down. Despite the chain, he forced his fingers into the gap of the door, trying to pry it open. "Ellie, you're in there, right? Come back. You're not going to betray me too, are you? Go home. I'm calling the police." "Go ahead, call them. I'm just here to get my own child. The police won't do anything about that." "I told you, she's not here," I repeated, but it seemed like he wasn't even listening. He continued pulling at the door with a frightening amount of strength, trying to force it open. What if Kendrick didn't stop at the door? What if he went around the back, through the garden? What if he spotted Ellie through the window? I couldn't remember if I had locked all the windows. Panic started setting in as I struggled to hold the door shut against him. Just then, I heard a familiar female voice from beyond the door. "Kendrick, what do you think you're doing?" At that moment, Kendrick's hand pulled back from the door. I cautiously peeked outside to see Kendrick being restrained by his parents. "How dare you come here and cause a scene, embarrassing us like this?" Olivia, Kendrick's mother, scolded him as she held his arm. Kendrick squirmed, startled by his parents' sudden appearance, but he didn't have the strength to resist. Though Olivia and her husband were trying to restrain him, Kendrick slipped out of their grasp. However, he didn't fight them further. He just looked flustered. "What are you doing here? We were following Ellie. And then we saw you causing this ruckus. You idiot, you're such an embarrassment." Olivia, breathless from the effort of restraining Kendrick, raised her voice. It seemed Ellie had confided in her grandparents about Kendrick and had told them she was coming to my house. They had tried to stop her, but Ellie wouldn't listen and left anyway. In a rush, they followed her to my home, only to find Kendrick causing a scene. Seeing Olivia on the verge of tears as she scolded him, even Kendrick appeared rattled. Watching his pitiful expression through the chain door gave me an odd sense of relief. I realized that I no longer had to engage with this man on any reasonable terms. Both of Kendrick's parents looked genuinely apologetic, bowing their heads together. "We are so sorry for Kendrick. It's our fault, too, for raising him this way." "No, Dad, Mom, you don't need to bow your heads too." Kendrick feebly tried to offer some words, forcing a smile as if trying to ease the tension. But Olivia shot him a sharp glare. "Shut up. Do you even realize what you've done? We do have to apologize. You've created such a serious mess." Kendrick opened his mouth to say something, but before he could, Brett, his father, grabbed his head and forced it down. "Kendrick, you need to apologize. You're the one who owes the biggest apology here," Brett said in a low, commanding tone, causing Kendrick to flinch. Though his face was hidden from me, I could imagine the cold sweat breaking out. Yet even now, Kendrick didn't utter a word of apology. It was clear to me that the apology he gave over the phone earlier had been empty. He probably thought saying sorry back then would smooth things over. Seeing Kendrick remain silent with his head bowed, Olivia's expression darkened. "Kendrick," she shouted, and slapped him across the face. Since Brett still had a hold of his head, Kendrick couldn't avoid the full force of the blow. "Don't you feel any shame? Don't you feel sorry for Charity, for Adeline, for Ellie? If you truly don't, then you're lacking even the most basic human decency," Olivia yelled furiously. It was with such intensity that I nearly felt compelled to intervene. After the slap, Brett let go of Kendrick, but the look he gave his son was one of utter disgust, as if he were staring at something vile. "I never thought you'd turn out like this. To think you lack even the most basic humanity," Brett said, his voice heavy with disappointment. After that, Kendrick's parents and I sat down to discuss what would happen next. The first topic was Ellie. His parents expressed their desire for me to take custody of Ellie. It wasn't so much that they wanted to give up custody, but more that they didn't want to leave Ellie in Kendrick's care. With no contact from Ellie's biological mother, they said they trusted me the most. However, they acknowledged that if I divorced Kendrick, they couldn't force me to take responsibility for Ellie. In that case, Kendrick would retain custody, but his parents would take care of Ellie themselves. I agree with that. If Ellie stays with you both, I'll feel reassured, and it will be easier for me to visit her. But Kendrick, you don't have to worry about that. We'll make sure Kendrick never sets foot in our house again." The moment Kendrick heard those words, his eyes widened, and like a child, he clung to Olivia. "You've got to be kidding me. You're going to prioritize your grandchild over your own son. Lock me out. Who does that to their own kid?" As Kendrick panicked, Brett roughly grabbed him by the collar. He yanked him away from Olivia and duked down at him with disdain. "We're doing this because you're the one who isn't normal," Brett spoke in a low voice. The intensity of Brett's words left Kendrick speechless, and he slumped in defeat. Next, I informed Kendrick that I would be filing a divorce suit. and seeking compensation from both him and his mistress. His parents assured me that they would take full responsibility to ensure Kendrick didn't try to escape his financial obligations. We had Kendrick sign the divorce papers and set a date for the lump sum payment of the compensation. Throughout the process, Kendrick didn't offer any objections. He just nodded passively, as if he were a shell of his former self. Ellie was taken in by her grandparents. Before leaving, she bowed once again to Adeline and me. Then, glancing over at Kendrick, who stood between his parents, dazed, she quietly said, "I used to like Daddy, but now I don't feel anything for him at all. I wonder why." At her words, Adeline burst out laughing. I gently stroked Ellie's hair and said, "That's probably because you've learned to reflect on your own actions and grow." Ellie smiled softly at this and nodded happily. Later, I heard more from Kendrick's parents. Apparently, the news of Kendrick's scandal had spread among the extended family, and he had been cut off not just by his parents, but by almost every relative. His parents upheld their decision to bar Kendrick from their home, just as they had promised. Even when Kendrick showed up at their doorstep, they refused to respond, and they had also informed the neighbors not to pay him any attention. There was one incident where Ellie accidentally opened the door when Kendrick visited, but as soon as she saw his face, she immediately shut the door and locked it. The thought of this scene nearly made me laugh. As for Kendrick's affair, things had come to light at his workplace. Since his mistress was a colleague, both of them were severely reprimanded by their boss. The woman, feeling uncomfortable at the company after the scandal broke, decided to resign. However, upon learning that she, too, was responsible for paying compensation, she hurriedly started job hunting. It seemed she had assumed Kendrick would handle the payments alone. I had sent her a formal demand letter, but when she called me, she genuinely sounded puzzled. "Why do I have to pay too? It was Kendrick who cheated on his wife. The fact that she knowingly engaged in an affair with a married man did not make her innocent, and I had Kendrick's testimony and solid evidence to support my claims." It was only after I threatened legal action that she finally realized her own accountability. By the time she came to this realization, she had already quit her job, so she desperately searched for new employment. Unfortunately for her, the new company turned out to be a highly exploitative one, and she repeatedly begged for reduction or delay in payments. However, her social media was filled with posts bragging about how much money she spent at host clubs, so it was clear she wasn't being entirely truthful. Despite her precarious financial situation, she continued to waste her money on host clubs, spiraling down a dangerous path. It was clear to me that she was headed for ruin, but frankly, I couldn't care less. On the other hand, Kendrick apparently continues working at his company to pay for the compensation and child support. The people at work keep making snide remarks, gossiping behind my back, and deliberately setting me up to make mistakes. Brett received a long, complaining email from Kendrick, but he just ignored it. I'm sure the snide remarks and gossip are true, but if Kendrick were to actually make mistakes at work, it would be his coworkers who'd have to clean up the mess. It's far more likely that they'd just do the job without involving him if he's that much of a hassle. Brett chuckled, saying Kendrick was just playing the victim. Kendrick's salary is now set up so that a certain amount is automatically transferred each month to his parents' bank account. Brett arranged this because he knew Kendrick would find excuses to avoid payments if left to his own devices. They made sure that Kendrick's salary is split and directly deposited into two accounts, one for Ellie's child support, and the other to repay the compensation his parents initially covered for me. You'd think that Kendrick would rebel, but his in-laws told him, "If you don't comply, It won't just be a ban from the house. It'll be a complete disowning. So he reluctantly reported it to the company. Ellie, meanwhile, is doing well. She attends a new elementary school and is thriving academically. She's even expressed a desire to take the entrance exams for junior high school, just like Adeline did. Her grandparents are committed to raising her with love and discipline, ensuring she doesn't turn out like Kendrick. As for Adeline and me, we decided to use the money from selling the land as a down payment to build a new house. It's quite spacious for just the two of us, but we're living together peacefully and happily.
I heard about it. Isn't it great? I heard you bought a new house. We want to live together too. From what I heard, it's a detached house with a vegetable garden and yard. My son, Eric, and his family showed up out of nowhere, saying they had caught wind of the situation. You know, it's custodial for parents to live with their oldest son, Eric declared matter-of-factly. His wife, Taylor, chimed in. We're moving here as well. If you refuse, don't expect us to take care of you when you're old. Eric threatened, completely disregarding our feelings on the matter before leaving abruptly. The plan worked out perfectly, didn't it? My daughter, Angela, laughed, but with a hint of sadness in her eyes. Yes, I can't wait for moving day, I replied, trying to stay positive despite the circumstances. On the day of the move, after the initial flurry of activity had settled, I turned on my phone to find numerous missed calls from Eric. Mom, where are you now? What the hell is this? The place hasn't been renovated at all, he yelled, his voice filled with indignation. Oh, but I did have it thoroughly cleaned, you know. Angela helped out too, and it was quite the task. From now on, you'll have to keep it tidy yourselves, I explained calmly. When Eric and his family, who had so forcefully insisted on moving in together, finally arrived at their new residence, they were greeted by an unexpected sight. My name is Melanie Thompson, and I'm 62 years old. Currently, I live alone on my widow's pension. My husband, Andrew, who was 3 years my senior, passed away from illness last year at the young age of 64. Due to Andrew's frequent job transfers, I decided to quit my own job upon getting married to follow him wherever he was assigned. We were blessed with our eldest son, Eric, and daughter, Angela, while on assignment. But after giving birth to Angela, my health took a serious turn for the worse. I found myself unable to accompany Andrew to his next posting. The destination was overseas, you see. With no siblings and my parents long gone, I had no one to turn to for support. That's when I made the decision to move in with my in-laws. My Phil Lucas and Mill Fiona were incredibly kind people who had treated me like their own daughter ever since I married into the family. Assured by their warmth, I accepted their offer to live together. However, no matter how lovely people may be, actually sharing a home can be quite different from what one imagines. Through my experience living with my in-laws, I would come to learn this lesson all too well. Lucas and Fiona doted on Eric excessively. Eric is the heir to the Thompson family name. Perhaps it was because his grandparents showered him with such praise, but his arrogant behavior gradually became more and more noticeable. I'm the successor of the Thompson family, so I'm in a different league than the rest of you, he would boast. When I first moved in with my in-laws, separated from Andrew, Eric was only 5 years old, just a preschooler. Yet this child began belittling his friends and pushing his responsibilities onto others. After receiving a complaint from his preschool teacher, I decided to have a talk with him. Eric, why would you say such things to your friends? I asked gently. Because I'm different from other people. I have to teach those who don't understand that, don't I? He retorted defiantly. His response left me utterly shocked. How on earth did you start thinking that way? Eric, you're the same as your friends. If you keep saying things like that, they won't like you anymore. I tried to reason with him. I'm special, that's why. Grandpa and Grandma said so. They told me I'm smart and great. Eric yelled before bursting into tears. He tore away from my grasp and ran off to Lucas and Fiona's room. I was left standing there, dumbfounded. Did my in-laws really say such things to Eric? Sure, they doted on him a lot. Sometimes I thought they went overboard, but I brushed it off, thinking it was understandable for grandparents who were thrilled to be living with their grandson. However, I would soon learn that my perspective was far too lenient. Melanie, I heard you scolded Eric quite harshly. Fiona confronted me one day. That afternoon, when I went to pick Eric up from the school bus, the teacher asked to have a word with me. Apparently, Eric had hit one of his classmates. While everyone was lining up and waiting for their turn to use the playground equipment, Eric had cut in line. When a friend called him out on it, they got into an argument, and Eric ended up hitting the other child. I listened to Eric's side of the story, and, confirming it was true, scolded him for his actions. But he threw a tantrum and hurled his preschool bag at me. That's when I grabbed his arm and reprimanded him more sternly. Eric, all your preschool friends are equal. It's not okay for you to skip the line. And no matter what, you shouldn't hit your friends. Do you understand? I explained firmly. I'm special, so why do I have to line up like everyone else? He shouted, shaking off my hand, ran out of the room, crying. Just then, Lucas and Fiona entered with serious expressions on their faces and said something outrageous. We heard his side of the story. Grabbing a preschooler's arm so forcefully, doesn't that count as abuse? Fiona accused. I was taken aback by her words, but I figured she must have only listened to his one-sided explanation. With that in mind, I recounted everything that had transpired from the beginning. That's why I scolded Eric and tried to make him understand. I may have held his arm firmly then, but I certainly wasn't abusing him, I clarified. Oh, so that's what happened. But maybe there's a part of it that couldn't be helped. Fiona backpedaled slightly. Yeah, it's understandable. Lucas chimed in. At first, I thought they were referring to me scolding Eric too harshly, but their next words revealed that wasn't the case at all. He is truly bright and more remarkable than other children. It's only natural for him to think he deserves that kind of treatment, Fiona reasoned. Agreed. If anything, he should be given special privileges to that extent, Lucas added. My in-laws were actually condoning his attitude towards the other children. Realizing this sent a shiver of fear down my spine. I'm sorry, but I don't think that's good for him, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. If I didn't have a proper talk with them now, things could get out of hand in the future. I want him to have a little more empathy for others, I explained. But he is such a smart boy, isn't he? Fiona counted. That's right. He's only in preschool, but he can already read and do math, Lucas added. It was true. Eric had started reading picture books on his own without being taught, and he would even read to older kids in the neighborhood. It was a mystery how he learned it all. He probably picked up the letters from TV and building blocks, but he also had an excellent memory and could remember things he heard instantly. That child is a genius, Fiona gushed. Indeed. As his parents, it's our duty to give him a special education from now on, Lucas agreed. They beamed with pride at his brilliance. I wrote a detailed letter to Andrew about the current situation. I wasn't confident I could explain it well enough with just our usual phone calls and messages, and writing calmly helped me sort out my own feelings. He replied with an apology and asked me to endure it somehow until he could come home for a visit. In response to his words, I patiently tried to reason with Eric and convey to my in-laws what I wanted them to stop doing. But the more I spoke up, the more displeased they seemed. Melanie is too hard on Eric, Fiona complained. That boy is truly exceptional. He takes after Andrew and is bound to become an amazing adult, Lucas chimed in. It was true that Andrew was considered an elite. I knew his frequent transfers were because of his potential. I had heard that in his company, it was common for overseas branch managers to be on the executive track at headquarters. And my in-laws started making more snide remarks to me about that too. If only Melanie could have kept up with him. Of all things, to have her health fail after giving birth, Fiona sighed. Indeed, if she hadn't had Angela, he would be attending school abroad by now, Lucas added. They were even implying that Angela's birth was a mistake. I could handle them saying things about me. I could ignore most of it and argue back if necessary. But I couldn't stand them talking about her, who had only just been born, in that way. Both Angela and Eric are my precious children, and it was Andrew who decided to go alone. So please don't say such things to the kids. I retorted, my voice a little sharper than intended. My in-laws seemed to take offense at my tone, and their attitudes became even more blatant. Eric, why don't you come eat something delicious with Grandma? It looks like Mom can't play with you because she has to take care of Angela, Fiona cooed. Mom's health got bad when she had Angela. She can't give you all her attention like she did when it was just you, Eric, Lucas added. They kept filling his head with these ideas and continued to spoil him with special treatment. With my in-laws constantly praising him and speaking ill of Angela and me, Eric's gaze grew colder towards me. I repeatedly asked my in-laws to stop and told them that I cared about Eric just as much as Angela. But he had already stopped accepting those words. Mom only needs Angela, right? I'm the heir to the Thompson family and an important person. So why don't you cherish me more? He demanded. Influenced by his grandparents, Eric had become thoroughly convinced that he was the Thompson family heir. But even as an heir, the Thompson family wasn't all that distinguished. Lucas was the third son to begin with 2 older brothers. The family's assets consisted of a house, some land, and a gravesite. Even the eldest son was an ordinary office worker, not the type to put pressure on the main family. I heard that while the eldest and second sons had graduated from university, Lucas had failed his entrance exams. His parents told him they couldn't afford to let him be a Ronin, so he got a job right out of high school. I sensed that he had a bit of an inferiority complex towards his brothers because of this. So when the brilliant Andrew graduated from a top university and landed a job at a top-tier company, it seemed like Lucas had finally gotten his revenge on his brothers. I had heard stories like that. I had also graduated from a university considered prestigious, so I suppose that's why they had treated me well up until now. But now, I had become an enemy in the eyes of my in-laws and Eric. I wanted to take Eric and Angela and leave if possible, but my recovery was slow, and I wasn't even in a state where I could freely take care of myself. With no other choice, I tried to avoid causing disputes as much as possible and simply prayed for my health to improve while waiting for Andrew to return. About a year later, Andrew finally came home for a short visit. It was for various procedures and health checkups. Andrew wasn't on vacation, so he had a lot to take care of. But in between his trips to the company, he came to understand the current situation well. Andrew's overseas assignment would continue for at least another 3 years. Fortunately, my health had stabilized over the year, and he proposed that we go as a family this time. It seemed that even in Andrew's eyes, my in-laws' words and actions towards Eric were problematic. At first, both my in-laws and Eric were against it, but he spoke to them about the importance of being exposed to foreign environments from a young age. And so, our family safely left my in-laws and set off overseas. The overseas posting lasted for 5 years, during which time Eric seemed to have calmed down completely, and the overbearing behavior he had displayed at his grandparents' house was no longer seen. I think it was a good experience for us. When we returned to the States, Eric was in 6th grade and Angela in 1st grade. However, after our return, a situation arose where we had to live with my in-laws again. My in-laws' house was a rental, but the landlord demanded they vacate, forcing them to move out. Just as our return was decided, They managed to convince the landlord to wait until then. My in-laws had grown quite old, and they were worried about continuing to live on their own. So we decided to buy a house near Andrew's company headquarters and live together. From now on, even if there were transfers, they would likely be within the country, and in that case, Andrew would go alone. That was the conclusion we reached. I thought Eric was no longer young like he was back then, so he wouldn't be influenced by his grandparents, and they wouldn't do such things anymore. But I was too naive. As expected, my in-laws treated Eric special, and Eric, as if remembering those days, accepted it as if it were only natural. We couldn't kick out my elderly in-laws, and both Andrew and I did everything we could. But Eric had grown up to be exactly the kind of person his grandparents wanted. My in-laws passed away in quick succession before the children became adults, but the negative legacy they left behind was significant. As his grandparents had hoped, he attended top schools and companies, paving his way to becoming an elite. But as he grew older, his bad personality became even more prominent, and eventually he began to speak ill of his own father, Andrew. There was only one reason. He had entered a better university and a better company than his dad. I was always told by Grandpa and Grandma that I was better than Dad. Mom only paid attention to Angela and neglected me, so it's thanks to them that I am who I am today. Eric reminisced about his grandparents and mocked us, his parents, and he treated his sister Angela like she was a bug. You were spoiled by Mom growing up. In the future, you'll probably end up going to some bottom-tier university, having a shotgun wedding at some point, and barely scraping by living with some low-class guy, he sneered. He didn't lay a hand on her, but he repeatedly berated Angela with these words. Andrew tried to subtly admonish Eric, but now that Eric believed he was superior to Andrew, there was no way he would listen. The atmosphere in the house was constantly hostile, and I sighed, wondering if family life was always meant to be this bleak. At this rate, it wouldn't be good for her either. I was thinking of encouraging him to move out when an unexpected turning point arrived. Eric announced that he was getting married. His partner was a woman named Taylor, 2 years younger than him. I heard that her father was a department head at a well-known trading company. At the time, Andrew was also a sales department head at a company of the same caliber. Eric himself was satisfied, and indeed, in terms of social compatibility, she was a good match. Honestly, she was such a shoddy person that it was hard to believe she was the daughter of a respectable father. She was a pretty girl on the outside, but on the inside, she was a spoiled, selfish daughter through and through. She had never worked a day in her life, and of course, her grades in school weren't good either, from what I heard. She somehow managed to graduate from a prestigious girls' school thanks to donations, and had apparently been playing at home all this time under the guise of helping with housework. Still, as long as she got along with Eric, and the focus wasn't on us, I decided to turn a blind eye, no matter what form a marriage takes. As long as both parties are satisfied, that's fine. If Eric was content with that, there was no need for us to say anything. As long as it didn't affect us, Andrew, Angela, and I all felt the same way. After returning to the U.S., we finally had a peaceful home life for the first time. The tranquility lasted for a while, and during that time, Angela got married too. I went from living with Andrew, just the two of us, to being alone. Andrew had passed away. He was only 64. In this day and age, that was still too young to depart from this world. At his funeral, I came face to face with Eric and his family, whom I had grown distant from for the first time in a long while. They say a person's inner self is reflected in their outer appearance, and Eric and Taylor embodied that notion, their expressions turning nasty. Now Mom's all alone. She'll have no choice but to rely on us, Eric sneered. That's right. She's getting on in years, and from here on out, she'll only grow weaker. I wonder what she plans to do all by herself, Taylor added. But even if she comes to us for help now, Well, these things are determined by the relationships built up until this point. We don't have that kind of bond, do we? Eric brought up a past incident between us. Eric, she just lost Dad. Can't you offer her some kinder words? Angela interjected. Shut up. This has nothing to do with you. This is between Mom and us. Stay out of it. Eric snapped. That's right. When we asked Melanie for help, she was so cold to us. You have no idea how much that hurt. Taylor chimed in. I hate Grandma. Walter, Eric's spitting image of a grandson, continued with a scowl. Despite barely ever meeting us, they must have fed him so many lies about us that he glared at us as if we were his enemies. The first thing Walter did when he saw Angela's daughter Nicole for the first time this morning was pull her hair and make her cry, saying, Your mom's stuck up, so you must be stuck up too. Perhaps remembering that incident, Angela shot Walter a harsh look. What, you got a problem with Walter or something? Eric bristled. The atmosphere grew even more hostile. I stopped Angela. I knew that no matter what we said to Eric and his family, it wouldn't get through to them. I didn't want to ruin Andrew's funeral by arguing any further. Angela seemed to pick up on that from my expression and swallowed her words. Both Angela and I had plenty we wanted to say. But for now, the important thing was to get through the funeral without incident. I wanted to send Andrew off in peace. As hoped, the funeral ended smoothly, and all the mourners went home, except for Eric and Taylor. Taylor's parents had taken Walter and left early. So what on earth were they still doing here? Now that we've got a moment, let's talk about the inheritance, he said. So that's what this was about. Anticipating as much, Angela and the others had stayed behind as well. Nicole had been taken home by Angela's husband, Kendrick's parents. They knew all about Eric and his family and had agreed to do so. This time, there is no inheritance for you, I stated firmly. Don't screw with me. That can't be right, Eric protested. No, it's true. Think hard, I insisted. When Eric purchased his new home, Andrew had provided a considerable sum as a gift before his death. That's why there's nothing left from Andrew's estate to give to you. You're lying, Eric exclaimed desperately, but it was a fact, so there was nothing he could do. Money received from parents for a home purchase is tax-exempt. It should have been properly declared on the tax return. Remember now? I asked. Eric's face turned pale as he listened to my explanation. He had conveniently sealed away that memory. He must have been really counting on Andrew's inheritance. Mom, I'm renouncing my inheritance. Please use the money Dad left for your life from now on, Angela said, ever the kind daughter. In contrast, Eric's claims were truly pathetic. No, I've set aside a proper amount for Angela to receive. Nicole will need education funds in the future, and Andrew would scold me if I didn't make sure Angela accepted it, I explained. But Mom, you're still young, and they say life lasts 100 years now. I don't think having more money can hurt, so I want you to do that, Angela insisted. Then why don't you give us the portion she's supposed to receive? You're both saying you don't want the money, so wouldn't that tie things up nicely? Taylor suggested shamelessly. Angela and I were so shocked we were at a loss for words. I couldn't believe she could say something like that without any embarrassment. Even more surprisingly, Eric chimed in. Yeah, let's do that. Come on, it's fine, right, Mom? Get out. How many times do I have to tell you? There's nothing for you. Leave before you make me any angrier, I shouted, perhaps startled by my intensity. Eric and Taylor finally showed signs of retreating, but not before Eric left me with these parting words. Well, I'll give up on Dad's inheritance. Well, only Dad's, that is. What's that supposed to mean? I demanded. Shut up. It's got nothing to do with you. See you later, he said dismissively. I was sure he was now after the inheritance I would leave behind. I needed to take action while I was still healthy and able. As I was contemplating my next move, an unexpected opportunity arose. Apparently, there were plans to redevelop the area where I currently lived. Ultimately, they wanted to build a large apartment complex, so a salesman from a major construction company came to talk to me about selling the house. The current house was a pre-owned home I had bought when I returned from overseas to live with my in-laws. It held memories of Andrew, but also many unpleasant ones. In this house, influenced by my in-laws' words, Eric had become the person he was today. Of course, it wasn't entirely my in-laws' fault. I couldn't do anything about it either, so in a sense, I was just as guilty. Remembering that filled me with a complex, indescribable feeling. "Why don't you sell it and move to a place where you can live more comfortably, Mom?" Angela suggested, giving me the push I needed. I decided to sell the house and simultaneously began to put a certain plan into motion. I heard the news. "Isn't that great? I hear you've already bought a new house. We want to live with you too." From what I've heard, it's a single-family home with a vegetable garden and a yard. Somehow, Eric and his family had caught wind of it and came to me with those words. "I thought I told you before, there's nothing for Eric," I reminded them. "That was Dad's inheritance, right? The money from selling the house is your asset, Mom. In other words, it's your future inheritance. I should have a right to that, shouldn't I?" Eric said with a nasty grin. "Mom's inheritance. Eric, are you that eager for her to be gone?" Angela asked, outraged. Hey, don't get the wrong idea. I said future, didn't I?" "I don't remember saying today or tomorrow," Eric backpedaled. "That's right, Angela. Is your hearing going bad?" "We came to have this talk for Melanie's sake, so she can live a long and healthy life." Taylor chimed in, a beautiful yet somehow vulgar smile on her face. "For her sake, so she can live a long and healthy life." "What exactly are you talking about?" Angela demanded. "It's simple. Taylor and I will live with her," Eric declared. "What did you say?" Angela asked, her eyes wide with exaggerated surprise, as she looked at Eric and Taylor. "Melanie is only going to get older from here on out. It would be more reassuring for her to live with us, don't you think?" Taylor reasoned. Normally, an offer from one's children to live together would be appreciated. But coming from this couple, there was nothing to be happy about. "I'm sorry, but I'll have to decline," I said firmly. "Why?" Eric asked, incredulous. "I heard you're about to be kicked out of the house you're living in now. It's the house you built with a gift from Andrew and help from Taylor's father, right? How did it come to this?" I asked pointedly. I must have hit the nail on the head. Eric clicked his tongue and turned his face away, looking displeased. "Shut up. What does it matter?" he grumbled. "That's right. We're going to be living with Melanie from now on, so we don't need to think about our current houses anymore," Taylor added. The couple was clearly trying to avoid discussing their current living situation. "Anyway, it's decided that parents live with their oldest son," Eric declared. "We're moving here too," Taylor chimed in. "If you refuse, we won't take care of you for the rest of your life," Eric threatened. Completely ignoring my opinion, Eric and his family left with those parting words. "The plan worked out perfectly, didn't it?" Angela said with a laugh, but there was a hint of sadness in her voice. "Yes, I'm looking forward to moving day," I replied. This was the certain strategy I had been working on while selling the house. Eric and his family had fallen for it nicely. Even after that, Eric and his family contacted me numerous times, but I never gave them a clear answer and continued to evade the topic of living together. "I've told you, I have no intention of living with you," I repeated. "Are you sure you can say that?" "We'll seriously abandon you, Mom," Eric warned. "If that's how it is, then so be it. In any case, we won't be living together." I stood my ground. No matter how many times I said it, he and his family persistently hounded me. I suppose it couldn't be helped. After all, he and his family had no money. I heard that their current house was mortgaged due to debt, and they couldn't even continue paying the interest. My estrangement from him and his family, and their subsequent downfall, began the year Angela took her university entrance exams. You're kidding, right? Angela got into the same university as me? I can't believe it, Eric scoffed. It seemed he couldn't stand the fact that his sister Angela, whom he had always looked down upon, had been accepted into the same university as him. When she called to report the good news, he hung up as soon as he heard it. Forget a celebration, he didn't even offer a word of congratulations. Furthermore, when his grandson Walter was born, he never reciprocated the gift Angela had sent separately from us. When I admonished him for those things, this was his response. I bet you're thrilled that Angela got into the same university as me, but she's just a woman after all. She'll never catch up to me. You'd better remember that, because she'll learn it the hard way someday. Since then, we'd been estranged from him. Andrew and I had resigned ourselves to the situation, thinking it couldn't be helped. But then, one day, out of the blue, Eric called with this request. I want you to cover the cost of our housekeeper. Taylor's dad stopped paying for it, so our house is a mess. You've never done anything for us, so you can at least do that much, right? According to Eric, this is what happened. Taylor's father's manager had fallen from power. Nothing happened to her father himself. He simply lost in the internal power struggle at the company. An opposing director became the new president, and Taylor's father was relegated to a sinecure position. As a result, they no longer had the leeway to support Eric and the others. Taylor had no housekeeping skills to begin with, and the luxurious house they had built with Andrew's gift and her father's aid had always been cleaned by a housekeeper. Although Eric was a high earner, his income wasn't enough to sustain such an extravagant lifestyle, so he came to me seeking assistance. Eric, didn't you see me cleaning the house all this time? Taylor doesn't have a job, and she's not ill. If you don't have money, you and your wife should clean up yourselves, I told him. Taylor was raised as a lady, unlike you. We can't make her do that. I didn't climb the corporate ladder just to do housework. Don't you get it? A parent should want to help their child in need, Eric argued. If they were both working hard and still struggling to make ends meet, I would offer help. But that wasn't what Eric was saying. They were continuing a lifestyle beyond their means and expected me to support it. I had no intention of doing so. No matter what you say, I'm not going to help you. If you don't have money, live within your means. Everything else comes after that, I stated firmly. He cursed at me over the phone for a while, but I absolutely didn't give in. When Eric realized I wouldn't budge, he ended the call with these words. Fine. But in exchange, I'm never taking care of you in your old age. Don't come crying to me when the time comes. From then on, we were completely estranged, but it seemed they couldn't give up their lavish lifestyle, and their debt only grew. Then Andrew passed away, and they came hoping to get their hands on the inheritance, but were turned down. When they heard I was selling the house, I knew they would come crawling. Moving day arrived. What, is that all of your luggage? Eric said, looking appalled. My belongings only filled one small truck. In contrast, Eric and the others' luggage was lined up in several trucks, looking like a tour truck for some artist. In the end, he had forcefully pushed through the idea of living together. I already gave up my house for her sake, so don't tell me you won't live with us now, Eric insisted. That's right. Eric made this decision for Melanie's benefit, so you should show your sincerity too, Taylor added. The couple had pressured me, half-threateningly, until I agreed. You don't need to worry about me. I've decided to keep only what I need and let go of everything else, I explained. That works out then. It means there's more room for our stuff, he said cheerfully as he got into his car. Melanie, hurry up. We'll leave you behind. Taylor called out. I resigned myself and got into Angela's car. It was time to depart. The two cars eventually arrived at the new houses. It's older than I thought, Angela remarked. It was an old house, over 50 years old. Well, the inside is properly renovated, right? I asked. Yes, the inside has been cleaned up nicely, Angela replied. I see. Let's quickly move the luggage inside, Eric said, directing the movers who had brought their belongings. Of course, he didn't even consider the truck carrying my luggage. He didn't even check if it had arrived. After seeing Eric and the others start unloading, Kendrick quietly started the car. Amidst the voices of the movers and the sounds of shifting objects, they didn't seem to notice. We quietly left the place, heading straight for our real new home. A little while after leaving Eric and the others, my cell phone started vibrating intensely. It was on silent mode, so it made no sound. Looks like they've noticed, Angela said. With so many incoming calls, the battery would run out at this rate. I turned off my cell phone. I'll deal with it after reaching our destination. After driving for a while, we arrived at our true destination. All right, please take care of it, I said. The luggage was being carried one by one into the neatly arranged house. Actually, we had moved some things in advance a few times. To leave without Eric and the others noticing, having too many vehicles would be troublesome. In the worst-case scenario, I considered abandoning the truck and fleeing quickly with Angela and the others, so I only loaded things I could give up if necessary. I'm glad I thought to bring the TV and fridge, assuming we could replace them. It's better to avoid buying new ones if possible, even though money can solve it, I said. Angela laughed cheerfully at my words. After settling the luggage, I turned on my cell phone. A call came through immediately. Mom, where are you now? What the hell is this? There's no renovation at all, Eric yelled. Oh, it was cleaned nicely, wasn't it? Angela helped me, but it was a lot of work. From now on, you'll have to clean it properly yourselves, I calmly replied. The place I guided Eric and the others to was actually a fake new house. I came up with this plan to prevent them from following us to our real new home. You don't have a place to live, right? So I'm giving you that house. It's a gift for my assets while I'm still alive, I said. Huh? Don't screw with me, Eric shouted. I'm not screwing with you. That's the last thing I can give you, so take good care of it. Oh, and make sure to file your tax returns properly, or you'll be in trouble, I stated firmly. The house is much cheaper than the amount Andrew gave Eric for purchasing a new home. After all, it was built right after the Pacific War and is barely livable. You lost your job and have no income now, right? That land is designated as farmland, so you could grow vegetables with Taylor. You shouldn't have trouble feeding yourselves, I suggested. There's no way we can do that, Eric protested. Why not? Everything we eat is grown by someone. There's no reason you can't do it too. Eric insisted he was an elite and looked down on those who worked up a sweat or got dirty doing farm work. A little hardship and developing a sense of gratitude would do him good. Oh, and I figured you might have trouble getting by until the harvest, so I stocked the kitchen with rice, seasonings, canned and instant foods, things like ramen. Consider it my last act as your mom. Be grateful for it. I could hear Eric saying something, but I silently hung up the phone. I'd need to keep in touch for a while longer. Once everything was settled, I'd cancel this cell phone, for the sake of my new life. No matter how much they complained, the Thompson family had no choice but to live in that new house. They'd lost their old home, unable to pay back their debt. And Eric had lost his job too. His arrogance and condescension towards others had earned him repeated warnings during internal audits. But he never reflected on his behavior or tried to improve his attitude. In the end, he was demoted, and he quit, declaring he'd go to a company that recognized his true value. Eric was so convinced he was special, he seemed to think companies would be lining up to hire him. Reality wasn't so kind. No company would willingly take on someone who caused those kinds of problems. Desperate, he'd apparently gone to great lengths to try to sell that house, but it was a property he'd gotten for next to nothing due to lack of buyers in the first place. No matter what he did, he couldn't find a buyer. Giving up and continuing to live there was his only remaining choice. Now it seems he's receiving the bare minimum of assistance from Taylor's father and has started growing vegetables in the fields. If they work hard, they shouldn't have trouble feeding themselves. I heard Taylor, who had never worked a day in her life, is even helping with the farm work, sweating under the sun. Of course, they have to do their own housekeeping too. Apparently, she has even taken a part-time job to make ends meet. Walter, who was the spitting image of Eric, seems to have learned from seeing his parents' transformation. I heard he transferred schools and now gets along quietly with his friends without acting arrogant. That's the one thing that puts my mind at ease. I know it was a pretty harsh judgment, and I sometimes wonder if it was really the right thing to do. But I don't want Walter to end up like Eric. He doesn't need to become an elite. It's enough if he grows up to be a kind, ordinary person. I believe that wish will come true. I actually moved to a quiet suburb in the neighboring state. I'm living there with Angela and her family now. She encouraged me to sell the house and offered to let me live with them. We both have jobs we can do from home, so we can move anywhere. Why don't you come live with us, out of Eric's reach? My granddaughter Nicole has allergies, and they were thinking of moving somewhere with clean air. Angela convinced me it was perfect timing, and I gratefully accepted. Since moving here, Nicole has gotten much healthier, and I'm spending my days in peace. Like I told Eric back then, I decided to keep only what I needed and let go of everything else. The biggest thing I cut out was Eric and his family. If I had kept ties with them out of a sense of parent-child obligation or blood relation, I never would have found this tranquility. It's unfortunate things turned out this way, but I feel unburdened now, and I'm looking forward. I can spend the rest of my life here with my daughter and her family in peace.
Prioritize me over your mom. Come to the family gathering now. My husband, Kevin's angry voice echoed well in the silent funeral home. Everyone looked at me as if they were shocked. Please, Kevin. Just let me say my final goodbye to my mom. No. Hurry up and come. If you don't arrive within an hour, I'm filing for divorce. Divorce was something I'd actually been wanting to ask for. But I didn't want to add to my dad's worries, especially since he was already grieving the loss of his wife. Got it? You have 1 hour. Wait a second. The call ended. As I was wondering what to do, I was approached. What was that about? Dad asked, his body trembling. Have you always been treated like that? Well, yes. Dad has always been bossy to Mom. My daughter Olivia said that to him instead. Hearing this, my dad's expression turned from anger to a stern seriousness. Is that so? Then, let's do as he wishes, he said with a cold voice. My name is Sophia. I'm a 48-year-old housewife. Currently, I live with my husband Kevin. We met during our student days. Hey, I like you, Sophia. Will you go out with me? He confessed to me when we were high school classmates, and we started dating. We continued dating through college and decided to get married when we became working adults. I'll treasure you forever. So, please, become my wife. That was his proposal. Subsequently, at his behest, I chose not to seek employment and instead become a homemaker. Fortunately, I enjoy all aspects of household chores and don't have any particular hobbies, so I don't spend much money. Kevin always seemed satisfied with me. Sophia, you really are the ideal wife. Being told that was more than enough for my happiness. Not long after, I became pregnant with Olivia. Kevin, of course, as well as my parents and in-laws, were overjoyed. Mom, I'll help you too. Olivia grew up to be a kind child, always following me around, trying to help. Her kindness gradually extended beyond just me, to others outside our home. If she saw someone struggling, she would proactively offer her help. She seemed to have a strong sense of justice, directly confronting bullies and often coming home covered in mud. You really were a tomboy, weren't you? I kind of remember that. Sorry for the trouble I caused back then. My pride and joy, Olivia, grew up and moved out when she got married. Since then, it's been just Kevin and me living together. Today, as usual, while I was cleaning, the doorbell rang. Again? Looking at the monitor, there was Madison, my MIL, just as I expected. I sighed as I opened the door. How long does it take you to open a door? You're so slow. As soon as it opened, she entered, complaining, and demanded coffee as she turned on the TV in the living room. I sighed again at her behavior. I've always been troubled by these sudden visits from Madison. You're still terrible at cleaning and laundry. You're such a useless wife. She always complains about my housework. A long-standing issue. Madison adores Kevin and sees me, his wife, as an adversary. Hence her harassment. Because you can only give birth to a girl, it might be expected. It seems she is also displeased that I only gave birth to Olivia. As if inheriting the family name and estate were all that mattered. It's a real shame not having a male heir. She blames me for not having a son. I suffer from secondary infertility. No matter how hard we tried, I couldn't conceive another child. Madison complains about this too. I always listened to her snide remarks in silence. I used to argue back, but... Shut your mouth! A wife should listen to your MIL without talking back. I've been yelled at and had things thrown at me, so I've learned to just tune her out. I really don't want to let her in. But if I don't, she'll keep ringing the doorbell and start shouting, causing a scene. So, feeling sorry for the neighbors, I end up letting her in. You are Kevin's wife. What we say goes. After saying so, she would stay for hours before leaving. Relieved that she finally left, I caught the eye of a neighbor peeking from their door. That was your MIL, right? Are you okay? Oh, yes. I'm fine. Sorry for the noise. The neighbor reassured me. It's okay. Don't worry about it. Kind neighbors sometimes listen to my complaints, and sometimes visit on purpose when Madison is around, helping me out. Since Madison cares about appearances, she refrains from harassing me when there are other people, like the neighbors, around. Let us know if you need anything. Your grandfather was very good to us. This house is built on land owned by my grandfather, with the deed in my dad's name. Kevin has been warned. If you make spare keys without permission, I'll kick you out. So, the in-laws don't have a spare key. Thanks to my neighbors and my parents, I managed to keep some peace of mind. I really wish Kevin would take my side, though. Here she comes again. So what? I wish she'd tell us before coming, and every time she does, she complains about my housekeeping. Can you please talk to her about stopping that? Kevin made a face of displeasure at my words. And, not this again. I thought to myself, why? Isn't Mom doing all this for you? It's your lack of effort that's the problem. You two can't get along because you don't try hard enough. Get used to it already. He never takes my side. Having been spoiled by his mom, Kevin holds antiquated views in the worst way. The husband and his family always come first. He firmly believes in not doing any housework or childcare himself, adhering to a patriarchal mindset. Anyway, it's all your fault. Don't drag me into this MIL and DIL conflict. With that, he wouldn't even listen to me properly. Watching Kevin storm back into the room, I sighed again. It's been a while, Mom. Can I come over soon? One day, Olivia contacted me. To her words, "Of course." I agreed. The next day, she came over. "Why did you come on a weekday?" "Dad's not here, you know." "I don't need Dad. I came to see you, Mom." Olivia isn't very fond of Kevin. Conversely, Kevin adores Olivia, but she always seems annoyed by it. "After all, you were the one who always looked out for me, Mom. Plus, I can't like people who bully my favorite person." Saying so, she has always cared for me. "So, what brings you here today?" "Mom, have you thought about divorcing him?" I was taken aback by Olivia's question. Seeing my reaction, she gave a wry smile and started to speak. "You're not saying anything because you don't want to trouble Grandpa and Grandma, right?" Indeed, that was part of it. At first, I considered discussing it with my parents. But my mom has a chronic illness and has been in and out of the hospital for years. That made me hesitant to bring it up. "Now that both my husband and I are earning, we can support you, Mom. So, let's live together after you divorce Dad." Hearing this, I was torn. Indeed, dealing with Madison, who enjoys making trouble, and Raphael Robert, who does nothing about it. And Kevin, who no longer offers help or love. I wanted to be free from them. That's what I thought. "Are you sure?" "I don't want to be a burden." "It's totally fine. Let's live together," she said with a smile. Her words made me feel saved. However, I couldn't divorce immediately. I needed to prepare and find the right time. But then, our plans were suddenly disrupted. "Mom's in the hospital?" My mom had to be hospitalized again. This time, it seemed serious. Hearing Dad's exhausted voice, I pleaded with Kevin to let me visit my parents. But, "Huh? No way. If you go back home, who's going to do the housework here? But it might be really serious this time." "No. You're my wife now, so cut ties with your parents." Kevin was adamantly against me visiting my parents. Since getting married, I've only been able to visit my parents' house once a year. And that's only because Olivia begs to visit my side of the family. As I was wondering what to do, I got a call from Olivia. "Grandpa told me about Grandma." "I see. But..." Got it. Hand the phone to Dad." It seems Olivia understood everything without me having to explain. I obediently passed the mobile phone to Kevin. Initially skeptical, Kevin's expression brightened when he realized it was Olivia on the line. "It's Olivia asking." "Fine, I'll let you go." After a brief talk with her, he reluctantly gave his permission. Then, I quickly prepared myself and left for my long-awaited visit home in Olivia's car. "Really, Dad can be so irritating," Olivia said angrily as she drove. Despite my smile, I was deeply worried about my parents. "Mom, it might be hard to think about now, but you should really consider what's next." I nodded at her words. Even if Grandma was in danger, living with Kevin, who only cared about himself, was no longer an option. I became more resolute about divorcing. Upon arriving at the hospital, I found Mom unconscious and Dad looking utterly depleted. "Sophia and Olivia came." Dad. I knew this day would come eventually. Dad, always gentle and caring towards me, appeared so frail that I regretted not coming sooner. I'll stay here for a while. I'll be with him. I've taken some leave from work, so I'll do whatever I can to help. Thank you, both of you. After that, we spent our days caring for Mom and supporting Dad. Caring meant just speaking to her as she was unconscious. So, my role was primarily to support him. Then, as things became critical, "When are you coming back home?" A message from Kevin. Checking the notifications, there were other messages too. Apparently, Madison had been doing the housework in my absence. Among them was a message. "Come back soon. There's a family gathering." Reading this, "Mom is critically ill, so I can't come," I replied. Then, Kevin called. "Stop messing around. Not only are you neglecting your duties as a wife, but now you're also refusing to attend a family gathering?" I'm not joking. What gathering are we talking about anyway? Apparently, one of the relatives is getting married. It seems to be a celebration for that. But the name was unfamiliar to me. I couldn't leave my parents for someone I hadn't even met. It's impossible. I want to be with my parents. No. This is an order. With that, Kevin hung up. I sighed deeply. Mom. Grandma has. Just then, Olivia rushed in. That day, my mom passed away. Soon after, arrangements for her funeral began. Despite her chronic illness, Mom was kind and knowledgeable. She was loved by many, evidenced by not just relatives but various people who came to pay their respects. Dad didn't come. He didn't. I had informed Kevin about the funeral, but he didn't show up. As the funeral proceeded solemnly, my mobile phone rang with a call from Kevin. I should have left the room, but seeing it was him calling, I hesitated. Olivia, thinking something. "Just answer it on speaker," she said. Hearing this, I could somewhat guess Olivia's thoughts. She must have planned to expose his wrongdoings to everyone right there. So, I deliberately put the phone on speaker and answered. "I'm at a funeral right now." "What are you doing?" "All the other relatives are gathered." His yelling silenced me momentarily. The attendees looked at me, wondering what was happening, but when I signaled for silence, the room quieted down. "There's a family gathering today. Come here right now and help my mom." It's impossible. It's my mom's funeral now. You must prioritize me over your mom. Come to the family gathering now. His angry voice resonated in the silent funeral hall. Everyone's faces showed barely concealed irritation at his remarks. "Please, Kevin. Just let me say my final goodbye to my mom." "No. Hurry up and come. If you don't arrive within an hour, I'm filing for divorce." I had wanted to initiate the divorce myself, but I didn't want to add to my dad's worries, especially since he was already grieving. "Got it? You have 1 hour. Wait a second." The call ended. As I was pondering what to do. "What was that?" Dad approached. His body was trembling. "Have you always been treated like that?" "Well, yes. Dad has always been bossy to Mom." Olivia spoke for me. My dad's expression turned from anger to stern seriousness. "Is that so? Then, let's do as he wishes," he said with a cold voice. An hour later, dressed in mourning attire, my relatives and I visited the in-laws' house. When I rang the doorbell, "You're late." "Huh?" Madison appeared, angry. But seeing all of us together, she stiffened. Ignoring her, we stepped into the in-laws' house. Moving towards the noise, we saw men laughing crudely, possibly drinking. The women, upon seeing us, were surprised and silently made way. We've arrived. Late. What? Kevin stopped mid-sentence as he turned to see us, his expression mirroring Madison's. As the group in mourning attire entered, the lively atmosphere among the relatives shifted to surprise. What's with that outfit? And why are Sophia's dad here? You told me to come right away, even though I was in the middle of my mom's funeral. So, we came specially. It seems we had to prioritize you over my wife, so here we are. We said this to Kevin with a smile. But no one's eyes were smiling. Realizing this, Kevin stammered. And? That is. Avoiding eye contact. Could you please explain why you called Sophia away? What right did you have to take her away from the precious time of saying her final goodbyes to her dear mother? Dad was smiling, but the pressure was immense. To that, Kevin replied, well, she is my wife? So being your wife means she has to endure everything? Taking care of household and children alone, tolerating harassment from your mom, and being forbidden to return to her parental home. Is that what you call a wife? Kevin tried to argue, but my dad quickly countered, silencing him. Then, what do you think you're treating my precious daughter as? My dad yelled at Kevin, who was visibly startled and froze. Stop it. He is scared. Madison intervened, glaring at Dad, who met her gaze coldly. A wife obeying her husband is natural, isn't it? In which era are you living? Human rights are defined by law, and your statement denies those laws. Are you aware of that? Dad quickly rebuked her words, clearly furious about the situation. Seeing him so angry was somewhat satisfying for me, though I didn't show it and kept glaring at Kevin. If that's the case, I shouldn't be allowed to come home either. Olivia then stood beside my dad and said that. You sometimes tell me to come home, but tell her she can't return to her own house? That is. You should have been at Grandma's funeral. Instead, you're here drinking. I've always disliked that about you. Kevin looked shocked by Olivia's words, clearly not expecting to be disliked by her. Triggered by this. Unbelievable! Worst person ever, my relatives said. And about half of Kevin's relatives also began to look at the in-laws disdainfully. What? Olivia dislikes me. Kevin, get a hold of yourself. But he seemed too panicked to respond. Seeing their panic, we left the in-laws' house. After seeing my mom off peacefully, I returned to that house one more time to pack up my things. Are you sure you want to stay with me? Of course. I decided to divorce Kevin and return to my parental home. And I plan to live quietly with my dad. Sophia! As I was finishing packing up, Kevin barged in, with Madison right behind him. It seems Robert, my Fael, was nowhere to be found. He always seems to flee from these situations. Just in time. Sign this. I handed Kevin the completed divorce papers. Seeing them, Kevin turned pale and apologized profusely. I need you, Sophia. Please, reconsider. I refuse. I no longer have any love for you. Sophia, I'll forgive what happened before. So you should forgive him too. Something in me snapped at her words. Who's forgiving whom, you said? What? There's nothing I need to be forgiven for. She flinched as I suddenly raised my voice. Ignoring her, I vented all the frustrations I had been holding back. The unannounced visits I detested. The constant complaints about housekeeping. And how I was always treated as a housekeeper at the in-laws' house without a moment to rest. I vented my accumulated frustrations to them. And why should I be the one to ask for forgiveness? Rather, shouldn't you be asking for forgiveness? For intruding and staying for hours on end, complaining about everything, and treating me like a housekeeper. Madison fell silent, perhaps intimidated by my dad's glare beside me. Kevin, I can't leave my precious daughter in your care. Get out of this house. What? This house is in my name. You're the one who should leave. He turned pale as if he had forgotten that fact. And then Dad said, "Get out, now!" And he drove Kevin and his company away. Wait. Sophia, reconsider, please. Wait a second. Before you go, just sign the divorce papers. When I stopped him, Kevin looked happy. But his mood quickly dropped with the words that followed. Finally resigning, he signed the divorce papers. I'm glad we could divorce without issue. Yes, indeed. As my dad and I shared a laugh, the outside became noisy. We looked outside to see what was happening. Why did Dad leave us here? Apparently, Kevin and Madison had arrived in a car driven by Robert, who left while they were arguing with us. After some commotion, the police, called by a neighbor, took them away. They never stop causing trouble, I muttered, watching the scene unfold. Then, taking advantage of the quiet, I took my things and returned to my parental home. Ah, a message from Robert. Upon returning home, I saw a message from Robert on my mobile phone. He expressed his regret for not being able to protect me, and explained that his early departure was actually a strategic move to give the women in Kevin's family time to escape. It seems that the women were still at the in-laws' house under the guise of tidying up. It seems our intrusion woke the women up. So they all escaped while Robert was buying time. Robert had remained silent inside the in-laws' house, seemingly part of Madison's scheming. And everyone had been ignoring him. This time, he got his revenge. I might have misunderstood him. No, his failure to protect Sophia is a fact. Don't feel sorry for him. Instead, let's be happy we've cut ties with that house. I agreed with his perspective. Kevin and Madison are now in trouble, facing resentment from the spouses of the women who managed to escape. And Robert has divorced Madison as well. After being criticized by everyone, the two were kicked out of the in-laws' house and moved to a cheap apartment. It's going to be tough from now on. Did you do something to Dad? I significantly reduced his savings through the distribution of property and compensation for verbal abuse. Moreover, I informed Kevin's coworkers about the situation. He used to invite people from work over occasionally. Kevin, being conservatively old-fashioned in the worst way, sometimes forced his colleagues to come home. One of them gave me their contact details, saying to reach out if I ever needed help, which I did this time. As a result, his situation worsened. And that's not all. What? Tell me. Kevin had also been verbally abusive toward me in front of his coworkers. Upon learning of our divorce, they presented evidence they had been gathering and sued him. Wow, that's really low. Yes. And on top of that, he was fired and had to pay compensation to his coworkers. That's why Kevin had to move to a cheap apartment and is now struggling to get by with part-time jobs. I think she should work, but she's been a housewife forever and is living off Kevin's earnings. This situation is causing him significant stress. According to a coworker who spotted him in town, Kevin looked emaciated and irritable, kicking a trash can and being sternly warned by a passing police officer. He's hit rock bottom. It's good we cut ties before our child was born. The reason Olivia was at her parents' house was to announce her pregnancy. Seeing Olivia affectionately stroke her belly, I felt relieved that I had divorced in time. Olivia's husband was also there, currently keeping my dad's company. Would it be all right if I give birth here? Of course. I'm eagerly looking forward to the birth of my grandchild. Dad, excited about the arrival of his great-grandchild, brought out drinks to celebrate with Olivia's husband. However, it looks like I'll need to intervene soon before he drinks too much. Kevin and his selfish actions meant that he would never get to hold his grandchild, let alone see them. This, I thought, would be the greatest punishment for Kevin, who doted on Olivia. I've informed Robert about Olivia's pregnancy. But I don't deserve to meet her. Please focus on caring for Olivia without worrying about me. So, it seems unlikely that they'll meet. By the way, have you thought about remarrying? Not right now. It's too soon after the divorce. While talking to Olivia, I thought of a man named Joseph, the coworker who had given me his contact details and started reaching out more frequently after my divorce. That look on your face, is there someone special? Olivia laughed as she said this, and I ended up telling her everything. I think I know Joseph. What? He was always so apologetic when he woke me up in the middle of the night. Olivia remembered him fondly. It turns out he had always been considerate towards Olivia as a child, and had always watched over me. I always wished he could have been my dad. Is that so? You should grab your own happiness this time. Nodding thoughtfully at her words, I received an invitation to dinner from him and laughed together with Olivia. My own happiness. Maybe this time I can truly find it. I couldn't help but smile at the thought. I've arrived a bit early, haven't I? A year later. I arrived early for our meeting and was wondering how to pass the time when I heard, "Sophia!" Turning around, I saw an emaciated Kevin approaching with an unsteady gait. A lot has happened since then. I've realized how important you are to me. So, I responded coldly while keeping a distance from Kevin. I heard Olivia had a baby. Surprised at how he found out. I knew she was now busily raising her child. The last thing I wanted was for this man to interfere. What does it matter to you? It does. If you and I could start over. That's out of the question. At that moment, someone wrapped an arm around my shoulder. Turning to look, I saw Joseph glaring at Kevin. Are you Joseph? My colleague. Now, I'm no longer your colleague, but someone who is seriously dating Sophia. Hearing this, his face fell with despair. A year ago, I had accepted an invitation to dinner from him. And during that time, he confessed he had been harboring feelings for me for a long time. We decided to start dating. So, Sophia will be happy with me this time. Olivia's child will be cherished as my grandchild. You have no place here anymore. With those firm words from Joseph, Kevin left. I doubt he will ever appear before me again. So, Sophia. Yes? Would you marry me? Joseph asked shyly. Blushing, I nodded in agreement. And that's how I got engaged to him. Congratulations! That's wonderful. It's my and your mother's wish for you to be happy. Upon returning home to report, Dad and Olivia congratulated me. I thanked them, slightly embarrassed. Are you having a wedding? No. We're both too old for that now. Plus, Olivia wouldn't be able to attend with her child, and it would be hard for you, Dad. Disappointed by my words, both showed sad faces. But I smiled softly. Instead, we're planning to travel. The house will be left empty. That's fine. Leave Grandpa to me. Then, I guess I'll take care of my great-grandchild. Encouraged by their supportive words, I smiled and looked at both Olivia and Dad. Thanks to you both pushing me, I am very happy now. Thank you. The two exchanged glances, and my dad spoke first. It's me who should thank you. Having you made me and your mother happy. And me too. Because of Mom's loving upbringing, I am who I am today. I thanked them again. And soon, I remarried Joseph. Having you as my wife feels like a dream. Joseph's expression when he said this reminded me of when Kevin confessed his love to me. However, Joseph's was different. Unlike Kevin, who never looked straight at me, Joseph looked directly into my eyes. Even such small things made me smile. Years later, Dad had passed away, joining Mom. Now, Joseph and I live a peaceful life. A stark contrast to my time with Kevin. We discuss everything and respect each other, which I cherish deeply. Olivia and her family are coming today, right? Yes, the grandchild is already 6. Time flies. I want to buy everything for that child when they call me Grandpa. I couldn't help but laugh at Joseph's words. I understand his feelings very well. After all, I feel the same way. Just don't spoil them too much, or Olivia will scold us. That goes for you too, Sophia. As we were laughing together, lively voices came from the entrance. We smiled and headed towards them. Mom, Dad, we're home. Olivia smiled warmly. And the 6-year-old grandchild leaped into Joseph's arms, making him stagger. Such a tomboy. That's your child, after all. Olivia huffed at my comment. And as I burst into laughter, everyone else joined in. I deeply wished to protect these smiles forever. She's not family, that's why he sent her home. How could she say such a thing about my mother? That one's just a housekeeper. This is a family trip, right? Those without blood ties are strangers. She's probably tending to the fields I told her to buy now. My grandfather said too, laughing. My father and I were shocked. Cut the crap. What would happen after his shouting? My name is Hannah, and I'm 17 years old now. I live in the rural area, which is still common to have extended families living together. My friends' homes are the same, and of course, so is ours. My paternal grandparents, my parents, and I live together. Living together is one thing, but what comes with it is the constant harassment. Hey, Olivia, isn't the seasoning in today's meal a bit strong? Well, it might be just right for our son and grandchild, but it's a bit much for us old folks. Sorry about that. I thought I was being careful. Careful, huh? And it's still this salty? Are you trying to shorten our lives by feeding us all this salt? Right, it's common for wives to cold-heartedly bully us frail elderly. You know, the wife in the house next door also. Come on, it started again. My grandparents always find some way to make snide remarks to my mother, Olivia. It's always about something so unreasonable. Like today's dinner, it's not even that salty. Moreover, she's prepared separate portions for us and for the grandparents, seasoning them differently. I tried tasting it, and indeed, the elderly portion is bland. To me, the seasoning is far from enough. How can this be considered high in salt? Maybe it's better not to season it at all. Although my mother, who is used to it, just nodded along, I couldn't stand it and fought back. Grandpa, give it a rest. This is super lightly seasoned already. If you still think it's bland, why don't you taste your own sweat? A kid should be quiet. If Grandpa says it's too strong, then it's too strong. That's right. Hannah, you're just a kid, you wouldn't understand. For us elderly, it's quite strong. Your mother could make it lighter. That's why she's a bad wife. Hannah, make sure you don't turn out like her. Well, I love my mother's cooking. Unlike some tasteless old geezers. I'm in my rebellious phase, so there's no way I'm just going to take it and say okay. Catching a glimpse of my mother, she just hung her head, looking troubled, without retorting. She must have felt my gaze because she looked at me and gave me a weary smile. That tired smile pained my heart. It's not just about the cooking. Day in and day out, my grandparents always have something terrible to say to her. Like how she does the laundry wrong, or how her cleaning is not up to snuff. They even insist that leftovers are good enough for my mother's lunch, and that she should shower last. The list goes on. What era do they think this is? It's like something out of old drama series, these torments. The coldness my grandparents show my mother has another reason. It's because my parents keep their distance from my grandparents' peculiar faith. Instead of Christ, my grandparents worship Satan daily. They seem to blame my mother for my father, their son, being utterly indifferent to their faith. Their frequent saying is, "That one, Satan will drop into hell." My busy father is often away, and I come home late from the sports lessons. During that time, my housewife mother is left alone with my grandparents. Dad, Grandpa and Grandma were saying awful things to Mom again. They even suggested she's plotting something, saying the seasoning was strong when it was clearly bland. I reported to my father, who came home late at night. Honestly, I hate to bother my already tired father with such stories. But as his daughter, I just can't stay silent, can I? Man, happened again? Those two really are something. They don't realize that thanks to Olivia managing the house, they can enjoy their carefree retirement. It's all thanks to you too. I'm always grateful. Dear, it makes me happy to hear you say that. Hannah, you're such a good girl. No, I'm currently in my rebellious phase. It's just that my rebellion is aimed at my grandparents, so I'm less harsh on my parents. That's how much I dislike, or rather, detest my grandparents. Don't worry about it, Hannah. I'll talk to them. Just keep being on your mom's side, okay? My father said, patting my head, half irritated at being treated like a child, but also half pleased. Teenage emotions are complicated. One Sunday, I woke up late and lazily got out of bed, only to find my father arguing with grandmother. Enough already, Mom! My father's shouting voice snapped me to full alertness. Peeking into the living room, I saw my grandmother sitting on the sofa, looking grumpy. My father stood in front of her, and his face beat red with anger. Making her work in the fields on such a cold day, what are you thinking? He shouted. He is a regular office worker, but my grandparents are farmers, true to their rural roots. Though the size of their fields has greatly reduced due to old age. Field work? Is Grandpa doing it? Looking outside, I saw nothing but a white snowy landscape. The fields must be covered in snow. Is there something they're concerned about? When I was just thinking how dangerous it is for the elderly to work in the fields in such cold weather. Oh, I'm starving. What's all this ruckus about? Where's Olivia? Isn't lunch ready yet? My grandfather came in, scratching his belly. Okay, he is here. Wait, that means... Wait, don't tell me Mom's. My mother does indeed help out with my grandparents' farm work occasionally. But it's only during the harvest or busy times, generally, she doesn't. That's what I thought, but... That's exactly it. I asked Mom where Oliver went, and she wouldn't say, so when I pressed her, what's the need to do anything in such snow? Then she really went out. Oh my goodness. Well, managing the fields during winter is crucial. I know that. I'm asking if it's necessary in the snow. Snow repeatedly freezes and melts, messing up the soil. If you don't remove the snow, it'll be trouble in spring. Lies. I remember hearing that when snow covers the ground, it's best to leave it be. You deal with snow before it falls or after the ground thaws. Huh, is that so? Well, it's not the time to be impressed. Anyway, Dad, we need to get Mom quickly. Right, that was the point. Mom, let's talk later, okay? It's unbelievable that my mother has been working alone in such snow. Besides, it's starting to snow again. My father and I hurriedly put on our coats, boots, and dashed out of the house. She was there in the field. Exhaling white breath, her face red, she was shoveling snow. My father rushed over to her, and she gave a feeble smile. That smile again pained my heart. Why didn't I notice? While I was leisurely sleeping till noon, how many hours had she been shoveling snow? Being busy with work he brought home, my father hadn't noticed either and kept apologizing to the exhausted her. Sorry, Mom. Really sorry. That day, my grandmother got scolded by my angry father. You will be the one to fall into hell. After that, my grandparents were unusually quiet for a while. Seasons turned, and summer was approaching. The new term would start, and I would finally be in 12th grade. How about going on a trip? My father suggested. We have not traveled for a long time. After all, it's unlikely to go on family trips after high school graduation. Understanding the lonely feelings of a father, I pretended it was a hassle, but inside, I was excited. After all, parents pay for everything on family trips. There will be plenty of activities to do. Oh, that sounds nice. How about a beach? My rising spirits dropped at my grandmother's words. Wait, are you coming too? I regretted saying it immediately. Stepped on a landmine. What a terrible grandchild. Planning to leave us out. A kid like that, Satan will. She started, and eventually, Olivia. It's because of your poor upbringing that Hannah has grown into such an unthoughtful child. What a useless, no good mother. She began taking it out on my mother. Hey! I might have said something wrong, but it's not fair to blame Mom for that. Oh, how sad for a grandma to have such a cold grandchild. It's all because Oliver didn't discipline properly. Woe is me. Seriously? Woe is me, she actually said that. Astonished, I decided to give some payback by saying out loud, Stop joking! However, she continued to fake cry, while my grandfather nodded in agreement. Seeing the chaotic situation, my father sighed and tried to settle things. All right. How about we go together? Instantly, my grandmother's face lit up with a smile. Despite the troublesome situation, I was also looking forward to the trip. The day arrived. Living in the countryside, the airport was far. After hours' drive, we still had plenty of time before the scheduled flight. It's been a while since I visited the airport, so I wandered off from my family. When I thought it was about time and returned, I saw my grandparents sitting on the waiting chairs. Looking around for my parents, my father came back, munching on something. Looks tasty, Dad. Yeah, this is really good. You were eating something in the car, right? But I was also hungry, so I asked for one. Olivia, you want it? Oh, where's she? With a snack in hand, my father looked around. Hannah, do you know where Mom is? Weren't you with her, Dad? No, she said she'd stay and watch the luggage. We said we'd go for a walk. Hey Grandpa, do you know where Mom is? His response was unclear. Grandma, was Mom here when you came back? Yes, she was. So she was here. Maybe she's in the restroom? But no matter how long we waited, she didn't return. I checked the restroom, but she wasn't there. Looking around, there was no sign of her. Finding it strange, my father said with looking troubled, It's almost time for departure. Where could Olivia be? Is it time for boarding already? Then let's head over. Although my grandmother must have heard the conversation, she stood up without concern. Mom, we need to look for Olivia. She's not here, you know. What? Confused, my father tilted his head. I also looked at her. With a malicious smile, she said, That one's not family. That's why I sent her home. What the hell? My father was shocked, and then my grandfather said with a laugh, She's just a housekeeper. This is a family trip, right? A wife without blood ties is a stranger. She's probably doing the fieldwork I ordered by now. What freaking are you saying? We were just stunned, whereas they were laughing, unconcerned. Not family. What's that about? Mom's not family, then what is she? What's that? Cut the crap. Olivia is my precious wife. Wife or not, a stranger is a stranger. She's the bad stranger who ensnared our dear son. Right, I never liked her from the start. That's why I disciplined her. A stranger, not working, just squatting in our house, she should at least do some farm work. Let's say, what was it? Right, a neat. Just like a neat. They were chuckling with a vulgar laugh. I was so furious, and my vision turned red. I was about to say something when my father, quicker than me, stood in front of my grandparents and shouted, "Don't mess with me!" Yikes! My father's voice echoed throughout the space. In the busy and crowded place, his voice resonated surprisingly far. Without caring about other passengers who stopped in their tracks, wondering what was going on, he continued to yell, "Always just harassing Olivia with your petty torments. You think I don't know anything? I know it all. Yes, I always tattle. And just when I thought you reflected on that snow incident, you pull this childish stunt. What's so fun about this? Ryan, we were just trying to educate that woman for your sake. What education could you vile people possibly give? It should be you who needs to be educated. Ryan, how dare you speak to your parents like that? Dad, you said Olivia was a stranger, right? She is my precious wife. My beloved wife. The most important family to me. You say that my family member, Olivia, is not your family, that she's a stranger. Then I'm a stranger too. You two and I are strangers. Ryan, what are you saying? What am I saying? That's my line. Do you even realize what you're saying, what you're doing? My grandparents' faces got paled at his fury. I had never seen him so angry. It must have been the same for my grandparents. My grandmother looked like she might burst into tears any moment. However, my grandfather gave a wry smile at my father's state. It infuriated me even more to see him laugh it off. Listen, Ryan. Calm down. He seemed to want to somehow control his son, to maintain his dignity as a father. Anyway, we're running out of time. Let's just have Olivia give up this time. And, well, let's just go, just us. The gate close is almost here. And we don't want to waste the cancellation fee for the hotel we booked. What? Wait, what is he even saying? Expecting Mom to give up this time? Whose fault does he think this is? Whose fault do you think this is? My inner thoughts and my father's shout coincidentally overlapped. My grandfather let out a startled yelp. That's enough. If you want to go, then just go on your own. No, you guys were supposed to come too. Oh, I'm not family either, so it's fine. Hannah. As I casually responded, her face showed shock. What? Did she think I would go along with them? As a daughter of a non-family mother, I am not family either. No way! You're family. You have a blood connection. My bond with my mother is stronger. At a loss for words, my grandparents could only snort in response. I turned to my father. Let's go home, Dad. Mom is waiting. Yeah, that's right. I'll call her soon after. Okay, let's do that. Carrying our bags, we headed for the exit, followed by my flustered grandmother. Hey, wait! What about us? What's going to happen to our trip? That's not our problem. Go on your own. And preferably, don't come back. What about the money? If you want to go, pay for it yourselves. No way! Her voice echoed around us. My grandfather stood dumbfounded. Leaving them behind, we headed home, where my mother was waiting. She was seemingly happy, perhaps because we had called from the car, but I didn't miss it. Her eyes were red. There were traces of tears. Those two, I'll never forgive them. Hey, Dad, I've been thinking. That's a coincidence, so have I. While hugging my mother, I spoke to my father and sensed him nodding in agreement. That night, my grandparents, having few money for the trip, returned home huffing and puffing. They could have taken a taxi by promising to pay upon arrival or borrowed money from a police station near the station to take the bus. But they didn't even know or understand such things. That's just like them. I guess it served as a good punishment. At first, they were extremely apologetic, but in front of my mother, they began to grow bolder again.
We did nothing wrong. That woman is to blame.
But my father had enough.
That's it. We're finding a new house and moving out. We're cutting ties. I don't care about your old age.
He made an unexpected declaration. My grandparents were pale, but his determination didn't waver. He temporarily moved my mother and me to a hotel and hurried to find a new house. He found a good property convenient for his commute and my school. Dad, you are so reliable. Then, on moving day,
Please, we apologize for everything up to now. Don't abandon us.
my grandmother was begging, crying.
What are we supposed to do if you two leave us?
My grandfather was nearly in tears. I don't care. With a dismissive tone, my father left the grandparents in despair.
Olivia, please. We're sorry for everything. We won't do it again. We'll recognize you as family. So let's go back to how things were, okay?
Astonishingly, to whom Grandma pleaded was my mother. After all the terrible things they've done, how conveniently self-serving. Feeling disgusted, I saw my mother take my grandmother's hand. With a bright smile on my mother's face, just as her face lit up in response, my mother said, "Judgment from the grand white throne."
Huh?
Satan sees all the anger in this world.
What are you talking about?
The day to kneel before Satan is near, you'd better prepare your excuses. I hope you make it to heaven.
Wait, hey, wait.
Goodbye. Leaving the speechless grandparents behind, we got into the car. As we drove away from their house, I glanced back once to see them standing there, dumbfounded. They were getting further and further away, and I realized that might be the last time I see them. Inside the car, heading to a new beginning, as I chuckled at the passing scenery, my mother looked at me curiously.
What's up?
Well, just feeling a bit envious.
Of what?
Of Dad. He said, my precious wife, my beloved spouse, the most important family member to me.
Really? Hannah, what are you spilling?
Oh my, still so lovey-dovey after all these years. Really makes one envious.
Come on, no kidding.
My mother, blushing, lightly tapped my head. It didn't hurt, but I pretended it did and rubbed my head, then added, I wish I could have a boyfriend like Dad soon. Right after that.
A boyfriend?
His pained cry echoed through the car, holding the steering wheel. As soon as Thomas saw me, he pleaded.
Please. Take care of me.
Why should I do that? I blurted out reflexively. Who does he think he is asking this? When I was hospitalized with a broken bone. It's a no from me. Ask someone else. And who was it who said that? It's your own responsibility. Be grateful you even got help. This is the end of me reaching out to Thomas. I am Elizabeth. 32 years old. Married 5 years ago, with my husband Thomas, our son Anthony, and our dog Max. We're a family of 3 and 1 pet. Thomas works at a major IT company and is very busy every day. Leaving home early in the morning and often not returning until the date changes isn't uncommon. He frequently works on weekends and takes business trips once a month. Thanks to that, Thomas rarely spends time with the family and has almost no memories of playing with Anthony. However, he has risen rapidly in his career, attaining a managerial position in his 30s. We were able to build my dream house because Thomas worked so hard. My parents are farmers in a rural area. That's why I always longed for a suburban house with a yard. Thanks to Thomas, Anthony and I live comfortably. I've come to terms with our limited family time. To outsiders, we might seem like a blessed family. However, due to my husband's frequent absence, I handle all the childcare and housework alone. It's basically single parenting. I wanted to work and send Anthony to daycare, but Thomas insisted on a preschool that also teaches. So Anthony goes to preschool and I ended up as a housewife. But I have a reassuring friend. My childhood friend Madison. We're the same age and from the same countryside. By coincidence, our kids attend the same preschool. Madison has been a single mother since her divorce last year. After dropping Anthony at preschool, having coffee at my place is my only break. We share our gripes about Thomas and the hardships of parenting. It's when I'm talking to Madison that I realize something. Unknowingly, I've been harboring dissatisfaction towards Thomas. People always say it's wrong to feel dissatisfied in my situation, and I thought so too. But maybe, I was just convincing myself not to be discontent. One day, while walking Max, he suddenly ran off. I chased after Max desperately. A car had stopped in front of me, and while Max managed to avoid it, I wasn't able to stop and ended up hitting the car. It was entirely my fault. Max looked at me worriedly from the sidewalk. I was relieved he was safe, but I couldn't stand up. I was taken to the hospital by ambulance, diagnosed with a bruised shoulder and fractures in my ankle and fibula, and admitted immediately. It seems I'll be hospitalized for about 3 months. I wondered what would happen with Anthony's care. And the house. The worries seemed endless. I called Thomas's mobile phone. I thought he would cooperate at a time like this, but he was continuously unavailable. As I grew anxious, Madison called me. It was to discuss costumes for the preschool play, but I cut the conversation short and asked her to take care of Anthony. Madison was initially surprised and concerned for me, but hearing that I sounded stronger than expected, she gladly agreed to look after Anthony. I was so grateful I almost cried. Next, I phoned Mom to briefly inform her of the accident and my weeks-long hospital stay. She said she'd come as soon as she finished her tasks. Until Mom arrives, Madison would be the only one to rely on. After hanging up with Mom, Thomas finally called. Sorry, I was too busy to answer the phone. I reported the accident to Thomas and asked him to bring some clothes and essentials. But his response was unbelievable. No way. Why should I do that? I have to get up early tomorrow, ask someone else. I had expected Thomas to be incredibly worried, but I was the one shocked. Not just because he refused to bring my things, but because he showed no concern at all. I had hoped for Thomas to worry about me and our family. Was I too naive to expect kind words from Thomas? The next day, Madison came to the hospital. She brought my change of clothes and other necessities from home. Madison has a key to my house. And I have one to hers. We always agreed to help each other out in emergencies. I brought extra towels. Let me know if you need anything else. Madison's thoughtfulness made me feel so grateful. After Thomas's behavior yesterday, her kindness was a relief. I couldn't help but tear up. Madison said with a laugh, "You're overreacting," lending me a handkerchief. Madison is the complete opposite of me, calm, good at reading the atmosphere, and empathetic. I've never seen her in a fight. She's nothing like me, who wants to get a qualification and work outside. Are you okay from the injury? Take better care of yourself. Madison's ever-gentle tone comforted me. Don't worry about Anthony. He stayed at my place last night and slept with my kids. Without me saying anything, Madison understands. Why is Thomas so indifferent to us? I get he's busy, but he doesn't even visit you in the hospital and hasn't seen Anthony, right? While Madison visited, I vented my frustrations about Thomas. Seeing me sighing and lamenting, Madison smiled kindly. Men are like that sometimes. He's probably under stress we don't know about at work. Maybe, but not showing his face or concern, that's going too far. Thomas works late, he's not just out having fun, right? That's true. We have a comfortable life and our own home because of Thomas. He does earn enough for us. I felt somewhat convinced by Madison's words. Let me know if you need anything. I can make time to come see you. Talking to Madison lightened my mood a bit. I'll have a proper talk with Thomas once I'm discharged from the hospital. Right now, I just wanted to see Anthony. Mom came from the countryside to help, and after 3 weeks, I was finally home. Mom dropped me off and left immediately due to responsibilities back home. My house felt so nostalgic after 3 weeks. Max greeted me. He barked at my crutches as if they were the enemy. I sat on the sofa and looked around. Nothing had changed. Home really is comforting. Max kept barking at me, even as I relaxed on the sofa. There are no crutches now. What's wrong? Max dove into my bag and pulled out a handkerchief. The one I meant to return to Madison. I had put it in my bag to wash it at home. Max grabbed the hem of my pants and started pulling. He seemed to want to take me somewhere. I managed to get up and followed Max with my crutches. He walked excitedly. Max stopped in front of our bedroom, stood up, and opened the door with his claws. Why the bedroom? Max, what's going on? Without hesitation, Max dived under the bed and pulled something out with his mouth. It looked like a beautifully patterned cloth. Max dropped it in front of me. It looked familiar. I spread it out and realized it was a scarf. I remembered seeing it weeks ago. Yes, Madison wore it when she visited me in the hospital. But why is Madison's scarf here? I shuddered at an unpleasant thought. No, that can't be right. Madison is my childhood friend, my best friend, and she's kind. I shook my head to dismiss these scary thoughts. Then, Max climbed onto the bed and started pulling at the sheets. I felt as if the blood had drained from my body. If Max was right, it would mean Madison had slept in our bed. Madison's gentle smile flashed in my mind. It must be an overthinking. I talked to Max that no such thing have happened. Madison couldn't have slept here, right? Max gently licked my face. In the afternoon, Anthony came home. Seeing me, he hugged me tightly. Indeed, Anthony is my sunshine. I felt brighter and warmer. I tentatively asked him, "Where did you sleep while I was in the hospital?" "In my room, with Madison and her kids at our place. It was fun." "What does that mean?" "I thought Anthony stayed at Madison's house." "Didn't Madison say so?" My suspicions only grew. Where did Madison sleep then? I bravely asked Anthony where Madison slept. "I don't know. But she and Dad were talking in the living room late, probably drinking too." "I don't know. But she and Dad were talking in the living room late, probably drinking too." I left Anthony and went back to the bedroom. Standing there alone. The thought was overwhelming. Thomas and Madison in this bed while my family and I were ignored. I couldn't believe it. Or rather, I didn't want to believe it. The bed was neatly made, no sign of any disturbance in the sheets or duvet. But could the smell not have been completely removed? And then there was the forgotten item. That Max had noticed it. Since discovering this suspicion, I couldn't sleep in that bed. I started sleeping with Anthony. He was happy, not suspecting anything. Thomas had become a repulsive presence. With so many thoughts swirling in my head, there were many days I couldn't sleep. Where did we go wrong as a couple? When my leg cast was removed, Thomas left the house in a strangely good mood. I had a bad feeling. While waiting for the preschool bus, Madison arrived. She was unusually stylish. Her makeup a bit more flamboyant. "Good morning. You look so stylish today. Got a date?" I asked casually, trying not to show my suspicions. Madison smiled unabashedly. "I've met someone I really like," she said. It was clear now. No proof, but Madison was doing something despicable. She liked the one person she shouldn't. I struggled to hide my trembling, angry hands. After parting with a happy Madison, I returned home, stunned. I couldn't let Thomas and Madison continue like this. It had to end. When I was able to move freely, I decided to visit my parents. That night, I told Thomas about going to my parents' house next week with Anthony and invited him. "I won't go. Got work. You two go ahead." I knew Thomas wouldn't come. But his smile bothered me. He asked when I was leaving and returning. No interest in me, but he cared about when I'd be absent. I said I'd leave on Wednesday and return Sunday night.
Got it. So you're returning Sunday night.
Thomas pulled out his mobile phone and started entering something in his schedule. I could tell why he was so keen on confirming our return date. I didn't miss the smirk on Thomas's face as he fiddled with his phone. The 5 days at my parents' house were wonderful. Anthony was extremely interested in farming, spending every day in the fields with Dad, enjoying playing in the dirt. On our way home,
I had fun. I want to come back,
Anthony kept saying. Thinking about the confrontation awaiting at home, I felt heavy-hearted. After I returned from my parents', Thomas suddenly announced he was going on a week-long business trip. Previously, his trips were at most 2 nights long. A week seemed suspiciously long. Seeing my puzzled face. Got a lot of clients to visit. Might even land a big contract. Thomas started talking about work, something he usually doesn't do. It sounded like he was trying to cover up guilt. Yet, he was in a great mood while packing, humming tunes. It looked more like preparing for a vacation than a business trip. Thomas left early in the morning, even unusually saying, "I'm off." And he left. I heard the engine sound outside. He wouldn't use the car for a business trip. Feeling something was off, I stepped outside and saw our car parked in the garage. Back inside, I casually looked at the shoe rack and noticed Thomas's hiking shoes were missing. You don't pair hiking shoes with a suit. Checking the closet, his outdoor jacket was gone too. What kind of business trip was this? But still, Thomas being away for a week was a fact. I was relieved not seeing him. By then, I had no romantic feelings left for Thomas. A few days later, while cleaning the house after dropping Anthony at preschool, I received a call from an unknown number on my mobile phone. I answered with caution. It was from a hospital near my parents' house, located in the mountains. Shocked by the call, I rushed to the hospital. After picking up Anthony from preschool, we hurried to my parents'. I explained briefly to Anthony in the car. Thomas had gotten lost while camping, slipped, and fell down a ravine. He was alive but suffered from multiple bruises and a severe open fracture in his leg. Luckily, he was rescued by local firefighters. It could have been life-threatening if not for the rescue. Initially, Anthony joked, "That's just like Mom." But when I told him about the severity, he became serious and worried. I left Anthony with my parents and headed to the hospital. Indeed, Thomas's business trip was a lie. I knew it, but still, I couldn't contain my anger. I felt too kind for bringing his clothes and other belongings. I also brought an important envelope with me. At the hospital, I learned Thomas was in intensive care. While waiting in the lobby, I heard painful screams. It seemed to be Thomas's voice. I was worried, but also thought it was divine punishment. After a while, a nurse guided me to the ICU. There, Thomas was crying and screaming in pain and fear. His neck was immobilized, and his body was wrapped in bandages. Anthony, seeing him, would probably exclaim,
"He looks like a mummy,"
making a big fuss. He was in such a pitiful state. As soon as Thomas saw me, he pleaded, "Please, take care of me."
"Why should I?"
I blurted out reflexively. Who does he think he is to ask this? When I broke my bone and was hospitalized. It's a no from me. Ask someone else. And who was it who said that? Then, the curtain of the next bed opened. And I screamed. There was Madison. Indeed, they had gone camping together. Madison was injured too. Not just her arms and legs, but her face and head were wrapped in bandages. Her eyes were terribly bruised. She couldn't move freely. Thomas, with his face immobilized and in pain, hadn't noticed the curtain open. He vented his frustration and pain at me.
"Do you even understand my pain? Don't just stand there, start taking care of me."
Thomas had fallen from a high place to the bottom of a valley. Of course, it would hurt. He was lucky to be alive.
"Like I could understand your pain."
I snapped back at Thomas. My patience had reached its limit. Thomas lied about a business trip to go camping with Madison, got into an accident, caused trouble for everyone. And now he's making a scene about being cared for. It's your own responsibility. Be grateful you even got help. I was done extending my hand to Thomas. Our marital relationship was already over. Today, here it all ends. Madison is here too, so it's perfect. Time to settle things. I decided to corner Thomas. I didn't care about his pain anymore. Justice was on my side.
Do they call camping a business trip at your company? Or were there clients at the campsite?
I didn't relent. I kept pressing Thomas.
Do you need to go to remote mountains for IT work and risk getting lost?
Thomas glared at me through tears, enduring the pain.
Shut up. It's none of your business. You went back to your parents' house, didn't you? Don't lecture me.
What an audacious claim. I had honestly said I was going to my parents. But Thomas had lied.
I didn't lie. Did you have a reason to lie?
Thomas just glared, unable to retort. I turned my back on the silent Thomas and looked down at Madison.
Did you follow Thomas and fall too?
Madison, grimacing in pain, spoke.
Yes, I was trying to help Thomas and we both slipped and fell. So, your fun camping trip turned into a disaster.
I snorted.
It's not what you think, Elizabeth. It's a misunderstanding.
Madison retorted in a small, pained voice. What misunderstanding? It all seemed to be the truth.
I insisted on going camping with Thomas. I know this area well. There are hidden spots there.
Madison was defending Thomas. Maybe she felt like a victim.
Please, don't blame him. Thomas did nothing wrong.
Madison was sobbing. The more she spoke, the less truthful it sounded, yet she continued.
I didn't mean to hurt you, and I never expected it to turn into this. I'm really sorry.
Madison seemed intoxicated by her own tears. Her words felt insincere. I should be the one crying. Thomas, noticing Madison's voice, interrupted our conversation.
I just accompanied Madison for her hobby. I couldn't refuse your best friend's invitation.
Thomas seemed determined not to admit any infidelity.
So, the business trip was a lie, then?
Thomas began to get flustered. Victim-playing Madison continued to defend Thomas.
Both of you, stop it. This disgraceful affair will only bring more trouble if it continues.
It seemed I would be the one to bring retribution upon Thomas and Madison. I was done with Madison's melodramatic charade. I took out an envelope from my bag, which I had brought from home. I spread out the photos from the envelope over Thomas and Madison's bed. Thomas and Madison were speechless, their eyes wide. The photos showed Thomas and Madison entering a hotel arm in arm, and entering my house, hands intertwined. I had hired a detective when Max found Madison's scarf in our bed. They had been meeting not only during my visit to my parents, but also at other times. Thomas turned red with anger.
How dare you do this? Spying and sneaking around. We just had dinner together while you were hospitalized.
I almost laughed at Thomas's transparent overreaction. Meanwhile, Madison was still in tears. She covered her face with her hands, but I could see her peeking through the gaps. Maybe Madison was even worse. Thomas's tirade continued.
This is fake. You must have fabricated it.
He weakly swatted the photos away.
You won't admit it, huh? I didn't want to use this, but...
I sighed and pulled out an IC recorder from my bag.
I placed this under the bed in our bedroom.
Thomas and Madison swallowed hard. Sweat trickled down from the gaps in Thomas's bandages. I took my time looking at both of them, then pressed the play button.
Don't tease me. I can't wait any longer.
I pressed stop and turned to Madison.
Do you want to hear the rest?
Madison, losing her expression, shook her head side to side. It seemed she was beyond pretending to cry.
There's plenty more.
you spoke quite ill of me. Stop it. I'm sorry, just stop. My husband muttered softly. I asked Madison how long they had been involved. I was jealous of you. I failed at marriage, yet you lived in such a nice house, living luxuriously. And you were always complaining about Thomas. So, I thought I'd take him for myself. It all started from Madison's jealousy. She envied others.
If I had Thomas, I could have a life like that too. What's wrong with that?
Madison was defiant, playing the victim. While listening to us, Thomas tried to snatch the IC recorder from me.
Careful!
Moving suddenly caused him intense pain. He lost his balance and fell from the bed. Thomas didn't make a sound. It seemed like he had fainted. Madison, shocked, looked at Thomas. I pressed the nurse call button. Nurses arrived quickly, and I was ushered out of the ICU. Once in the hallway, I realized my legs were shaking. I had been strong in confrontation, but I was really scared. During Thomas's hospitalization, I started divorce proceedings. With plenty of evidence of his infidelity, the lawyer said the divorce could be favorable for me. I would demand alimony and child support from Thomas. But that alone wasn't enough to punish Thomas. A thorough division of property was necessary. I sold the house, liquidating it into cash, divided the savings, and split stocks and investments. Thomas's parents came to apologize sincerely. They would oversee the alimony and child support payments. I promised Anthony could visit his grandparents occasionally. I filed a claim for alimony against Madison too. She would repay it little by little. Madison suffered an after effect to one leg from the accident. She couldn't walk without a cane. Thomas's condition was worse. He was close to needing a lower limb amputation. He became wheelchair-bound. The affair, disguised as a business trip, led to severe reprimands at work. He was demoted as a disciplinary action. Though he could have been dismissed, his past performance was considered. No one in the office sympathized with Thomas. He faced cold stares. Having lost the house, Thomas drained his savings on alimony and child support, now living in an old apartment. Without barrier-free access, he struggled with daily life. Recently, Thomas's dad reported to me. Thomas and Madison had broken up. For Madison, a wheelchair-bound Thomas was no longer desirable. Thomas and Madison never imagined things would turn out like this. They must be haunted by regret now, wishing they had refrained from lying and stepping over the line. But it's too late for regrets. Nothing can undo the past. Anthony and I decided to move back to my parents' house and live with them. With my parents around and Anthony starting at daycare, I found time for myself and got a job at a local real estate company. I'm vigorously studying to obtain several real estate qualifications. Anthony, loving the increased opportunities to be in nature, seems to be thoroughly enjoying life here. Every morning, before the sun rises, he goes to the fields with Dad to care for the crops. Anthony loves watching Dad operate the tiller. He must think of him as a hero. After helping in the fields, Anthony heads to daycare, plays to his heart's content, and returns home. Living in the countryside has made him sturdier and more sun-kissed compared to our urban life. It seems being surrounded by nature is better for Anthony. My parents are happy and smiling all day, enjoying the lively atmosphere. Max, the hero of this whole situation, seems to love it here too. He used to be reluctant to go for walks, but now he eagerly awaits them every morning. He loves being in the fields with Anthony and Dad, playing and getting muddy. Recently, during a family picnic by the river, Anthony suddenly stood up.
When I grow up, I want to be like Grandpa.
Dad, with a big smile, patted Anthony's head. Mom watched Anthony with joy in her eyes.